The most powerful man in organized crime slid a priceless ring off the altar tray, looked his bride in the eyes, and handed it to someone else. He was laughing when he did it. Every kingpin, senator, and cartel envoy in that cathedral watched. Some laughed too. Some held their breath. And Celine Arden, the woman who had spent 7 years quietly building the financial skeleton of an empire that could swallow small nations, said 2 words that stopped every sound in that room cold. Fine. If you've ever watched someone walk away from something that should have destroyed them and instead understood that you've just witnessed the beginning of the most dangerous thing imaginable, drop your city in the comments right now. Hit that like button and stay with me, because this story goes places you are not prepared for. Direct once. The morning of the wedding, Celine woke before anyone else in the Vescari compound. She always did. That was the thing nobody understood about her. Not the underbosses, not the consigliere, not the political fixers who flew in from 3 different states to attend the ceremony. They saw a woman who was quiet, composed, graceful in the way that expensive things are graceful. They interpreted her silence as deference. They interpreted her stillness as submission. They had been making that mistake for 7 years, and she had never once corrected them because the mistake was useful. She stood at the window of the East Suite dressed in her robe, watching the groundskeepers move across the manicured lawn below. The Vescari estate sat on 11 acres of fenced property outside the city, an absurdity of old stone and imported marble that Ronan had purchased not because he needed the space, but because the previous owner had refused to sell for 3 years, and Ronan could not tolerate being refused. That was the precise and complete logic of his decision-making. He wanted something. He took it. He moved to the next thing he wanted. Celine had spent 7 years studying that logic, like a scientist studying a particular strain of virus, with precision, without sentiment, and with a very clear understanding of what it could do if it ever stopped being contained. Her phone was on the vanity. She didn't touch it. Everything that needed to happen today was already in motion, had been in motion for months. She turned away from the window and began getting dressed. The cathedral was 40 minutes from the estate by car. Ronan rode in the first vehicle with his consigliere, a lean, careful man named Egan Thrace, who had worked for the Vescari family for 19 years and had survived that length of time precisely because he kept his personal opinions inside his chest where they couldn't get him killed. He sat across from Ronan in the back of the armored car and reviewed the guest list for the 3rd time that morning, not because he needed to, but because having something in his hands gave him something to do other than look at Ronan's face. Ronan was in a good mood. That was the problem. When Ronan was unhappy, he was predictable, sharp, cold, efficient, the kind of dangerous that everyone understood and could navigate around. But when Ronan was in a good mood, he got loose, theatrical. The kind of loose that had historically preceded several situations that Egan had spent considerable energy cleaning up afterward. He was wearing the suit that had been made for him in Milan 6 weeks ago. It fit him the way a second skin fits, which was intentional, because Ronan was deeply aware that a man his size in a room of men who feared him needed to look like exactly what he was. And what he was something that had been built rather than born. He was not large in the way that large men often are, soft at the edges and slow. He was large the way load-bearing walls are large, structural, unmovable, everything else organized around him. He had a jaw like someone had drawn it with a ruler, and dark eyes that cataloged every room he entered in the first 3 seconds and never fully relaxed after. He was laughing at something on his phone when Egan looked up. "Dante's already at the bar," Ronan said. "The bar isn't open yet." He brought his own. Ronan slid the phone into his jacket pocket. Classic. Egan said nothing. Dante Morelli had been Ronan's closest companion since they were 16 years old stealing cars in the same neighborhood. And in the years since, Dante had transformed from a reckless teenager into a reckless adult with better clothes and more expensive habits. He was charming in the way that broken things are sometimes charming. Obviously damaged, obviously fun to be around for exactly as long as the damage was someone else's problem. Egan had worked around Dante for years and had concluded long ago that the man's primary function in Ronan's life was to remind Ronan of a version of himself that no longer existed, and that Ronan found this nostalgic rather than depressing. "You have the ring?" Egan asked. "Relax. I'm asking a logistical question." Ronan patted the inside pocket of his jacket without looking up. "It's there. Stop mothering." Egan turned back to his papers. Oh, the ring had belonged to Ronan's grandmother. This was the story as it had been told. The reality, which Celine knew and Egan suspected and no one discussed openly, was that Ronan's grandmother had pawned the original ring 40 years ago to pay a debt, and the current ring was a reproduction commissioned 3 years later when the family's fortunes had recovered enough that the story of the original could be reconstructed and the replacement inserted seamlessly into the narrative. The stone was real. The history was manufactured. Celine had discovered this 18 months into her work for Ronan, when she was auditing historical asset records and came across the pawn transaction buried in a ledger from the early accounts. She had noted it, filed it, and never mentioned it to anyone. Everything she learned, she filed. That was the habit. Information was inventory, and inventory was power, and power was the only currency that didn't depreciate. The cathedral filled by 11. Celine could hear the organ through the walls of the antechamber where she waited with her makeup artist and her single attendant, a woman named Petra, who was technically employed as her personal assistant and was actually the closest thing to a friend that Celine had allowed herself in the last decade. Petra was small, dark-haired, relentlessly competent, and smart enough to understand that her job sometimes involved asking no questions. "You look perfect," Petra said. "I look like what this room expects." Celine examined her reflection. The dress was ivory silk, structured at the bodice, with a train that had required 3 fittings to calibrate correctly. Her hair was up. Her jewelry was minimal. A single strand of pearls at her throat that had actually belonged to her own mother, which was the only genuinely personal thing she was wearing today. "That's not the same thing." Petra said nothing. She had learned when Celine was talking to her and when Celine was talking to the room. The organ shifted into a new progression outside. Celine straightened her spine by perhaps 2 millimeters, not noticeably, just the kind of internal adjustment that a person makes when they are setting something in place, and picked up her bouquet. "Time," she said. The procession was designed to communicate hierarchy. Every element of it had been choreographed by Ronan's event coordinator in consultation with Ronan's underbosses, who had opinions about optics, and with Egan, who had opinions about security sightlines. The result was a ceremony that looked like a wedding and functioned like a summit. Every seat assigned with the precision of a chess opening, every camera angle pre-approved. Celine walked the aisle alone. She had no family present. This was understood by everyone in the room to reflect her particular circumstances. She was an orphan, the record showed, raised in foster situations before working her way through a financial economics degree on scholarship. What the records didn't show was that her isolation today was entirely deliberate, because the only people who knew the full architecture of what she had built over 7 years were people she had chosen very carefully, and none of them were in this cathedral. She walked the length of the aisle with her chin level and her eyes forward, and she registered every face she passed the way she registered everything, with a kind of peripheral thoroughness that looked like nothing from the outside. Senator Halloran in the 3rd row left, whose offshore accounts ran through a series of shell entities that Silani had quietly helped structure. Cartel liaison Yusuf Breva in the 5th row right, whose logistics contracts with the Viscari distribution network had been renegotiated twice in the last 18 months, each time with slightly revised terms that he hadn't fully read. The Kessler family, old money, dirty money, the kind of family that had washed crime into respectability over 3 generations. In the reserved section directly behind the front pews, she noted them all and kept walking. Ronan was at the altar. He looked the way Ronan always looked in formal settings, like he was tolerating the architecture, like the space was slightly too small for what he actually was. He watched her walk toward him with an expression that Celine had spent years learning to read, and had ultimately concluded was the closest he came to genuine appreciation of another person. It wasn't warmth. It was the specific regard of a man who recognized value. He looked at her the way he looked at the best intelligence reports, with focus, with something close to satisfaction, with the settled certainty of someone who believed a thing belonged to him. She reached the altar. The officiant began. The moment came during the ring exchange. Celine would reconstruct it later, in her memory, stripped of emotion and examined for what it actually was, a performance. Ronan had been performing since he walked into the room, performing authority, performing ease, performing the role of a man so secure in his dominance that a wedding was merely another stage on which he demonstrated it. She understood this because she had watched him perform for 7 years. She understood the grammar of how he moved through public space. What she did not anticipate, what she had calculated as low probability because it seemed too overtly self-destructive even for Ronan, was the ring exchange itself. The officiant asked for the rings. Egan stepped forward from the side and produced the box. The officiant opened it. The ring sat there, the reproduction that everyone believed was an heirloom, the real stone in the false setting, the manufactured history. And Ronan reached for it with the easy confidence of a man who had never once questioned his right to reach for things. He picked it up. He looked at it. And then, with emotion that was so casual it took a half-second for the room to process what had happened, he turned sideways and held it out toward the third row, where Dante Morelli was sitting with his jacket open and his tie already loosened at 11 in the morning, and he said, "Hold on to it for me. She can wait." Dante caught it. He looked surprised for exactly a moment, the genuine surprise of a man who hadn't expected even Ronan to go this far. And then he grinned, because Dante's instinct in any uncomfortable situation was to grin, and he closed his hand around the ring. Laughter moved through the cathedral. Not universal, not the laughter of a room that found something funny, but the specific social laughter of a room full of dangerous people who were laughing because Ronan was laughing, and not laughing was the more dangerous option. The Kesslers laughed. Senator Halloran laughed. 3 of the underbosses in the left section laughed. Celine stood at the altar and felt the quality of the air change around her. She was aware of her own heartbeat. She was aware of the weight of the bouquet in her hands. She was aware that every camera in the room was now pointed at her face, and that the faces of every significant person in organized crime were also pointed at her face, and that the next 10 seconds would constitute a kind of test that she had not known she was being given until this exact moment. She thought, so this is what he thinks of me, not anger, something colder and more permanent than anger. The kind of clarity that arrives when the last possible interpretation of a situation has been removed and you are left with only what it actually is. She looked at Ronan. He was smiling. It was a specific smile, the one he wore when he was being theatrical and enjoying it, the one that dared the room to react. His dark eyes were on her with that same appraising regard, and underneath it was the assumption, as old and settled as stone, that she would absorb this the way she absorbed everything, quietly, efficiently, without disrupting the event. Celine set her bouquet down on the altar railing, very carefully, not dropped, set. She took one step back. Ronan's smile shifted. Not much, just a millimeter of recalibration, the expression of a man who has pulled a familiar lever and gotten an unfamiliar result. "Fine," Celine said. Her voice was completely level. Not loud, not theatrical. The word landed in the cathedral the way a pin lands on a marble floor. Small sound, enormous resonance. She turned and walked back down the aisle. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. Celine counted them in her head as she walked, spine straight, train moving behind her, bouquet sitting abandoned on the altar railing like a question no one had answered. Then the room erupted. Not in laughter this time. In something more complicated, bets. The overlapping sounds of powerful people suddenly uncertain, which was a sound Celine had almost never heard in 7 years, because powerful people worked very hard to avoid situations that made them uncertain. But they were uncertain now. She could hear it in the shift of voices behind her, in the chair scrape of someone standing, in Dante's voice somewhere in the third row saying Ronan in a tone that suggested even Dante understood this had crossed a line. She did not look back. She pushed through the cathedral's interior doors into the vestibule and through the vestibule into the antechamber where Petra was waiting with her coat and her phone and the specific expression of a person who is prepared for multiple contingencies and has now identified which one is active. Car, Celine said. Petra was already moving. In the car, heading away from the cathedral through midday traffic, Celine sat in the back seat and allowed herself exactly 90 seconds of being a person rather than a strategist. She looked out the window. She felt the particular quality of the feeling that had no clean name, not heartbreak, because heartbreak required surprise, and she had known who Ronan Viscari was from the first month she worked for him. Not humiliation, because humiliation required caring about the opinions of the people who witnessed the thing, and she had not organized her life around the opinions of criminals and their associates. What it was, she decided as the 90 seconds approached their end, was grief. The small, clean grief of a thing that could have been different and wasn't. Not for Ronan specifically. For the version of events in which a person as intelligent as Ronan had been as intelligent as he thought he was, and had understood what he had, and had been different in the way that she had allowed herself, occasionally, in unguarded moments, to imagine he might be different. The 90 seconds ended. She took her phone from her coat pocket and began working. The first call she made was to a man named Gregor, who managed a set of holding companies registered in 3 separate jurisdictions, and who received her call on the first ring. "It's done," she said. "Begin." Gregor said, "Understood," and disconnected. The second call was to a woman named Iris, who worked in the International Accounts Division of a bank in the Cayman Islands that technically had no connection to the Viscari financial network and actually served as one of its 3 primary clearing nodes. "Authorize freeze," Celine said, and gave a 9-digit code. Iris said, "Confirmed," and disconnected. The third call was to the captain of a cargo vessel currently sitting in port in Baltimore, a man named Stroud, who had been moving product for the Viscari distribution network for 11 years, and who owed the fact that he had not been arrested 3 years ago to the specific intervention of a woman he knew only as the accountant. "New orders," Celine said. "You're going dark. Dock and hold. No communication with previous contacts until further notice." Stroud was quiet for a moment. "For how long?" "Until I contact you. And if Viscari's people reach out, they'll reach out. Don't answer." Another moment of quiet. Then, "Understood." She ended the call and looked out the window at the city moving past. The lunch traffic, the delivery trucks, the ordinary machinery of a day that had no idea what was beginning to disassemble itself in the financial architecture underneath it. She had built the machine over 7 years. She had built it with the particular patience of someone who understood that power built quickly is power built on someone else's foundation, and that eventually you need your own foundation. She had built it with care that Ronan had interpreted as loyalty, and that she had known all along was something else. The care of an architect who is building something that needs to still be standing when the current occupant is gone. Every shell company, every offshore trust, every encrypted routing key, every banking relationship, every captain and courier and customs official who owed their loyalty not to the Viscari name, but to the financial relationships that had been built and maintained by a specific woman who had never put her own name on anything that didn't require it. All of it was hers. Not legally, in the crude sense, but in the sense that matters, in the sense that the machine ran on her signatures, her codes, her relationships, her institutional memory of how every piece connected to every other piece. Ronan had the name. He had the fear. He had the soldiers and the territorial relationships and the decades of reputation that made other dangerous men careful around him. What he didn't have, what he had never thought to verify he had, because the thought had genuinely never occurred to him, was the infrastructure. Petra, in the front seat, said nothing for the first 20 minutes of the drive. This was correct behavior. When they were 40 minutes from the city center and the cathedral was well behind them, she said, "The apartment on Crane Street is ready." "Good. Do you want me to—" "Not yet." Celine was reading something on her phone. "Give it until tomorrow morning. I want to see what he does first." "And if he comes directly?" Celine considered this. Ronan's first instinct in any situation was to apply force, not because he was incapable of subtlety, but because force had always worked before, and efficient systems repeat what works. He would come. The question was how long it would take him to understand that coming would not accomplish anything, and then what came after that. He won't come directly, she said finally. He'll send Egan. And when Egan comes, I'll talk to Egan. She set the phone down in her lap. Egan has always been reasonable. The accounts froze at 1:47 p.m. Ronan was still at the cathedral when the first notification reached Egan's phone. He had spent the 90 minutes after Celine's departure managing the immediate social fallout, reassuring the cartel liaison, exchanging terse words with three underbosses who were visibly recalculating something, watching Dante stand in the aisle with the ring still in his closed fist, and the expression of a man who has started to suspect he is holding something more complicated than a piece of jewelry. When Egan's phone vibrated, Egan glanced at it. Then he looked at it properly. Then he walked out of the cathedral and called three numbers in quick succession, and by the time he walked back in, he was pale in the way that certain very controlled men go pale when the data they are receiving contradicts every assumption their planning was built on. He found Ronan in the antechamber. "We have a problem," Egan said. Ronan was jacket off, sleeves rolled, the theatrical ease of the ceremony already collapsed into the harder posture he wore when events had failed to behave. He looked at Egan. "Tell me." Egan told him. The Cayman account, the primary clearing node for the Eastern distribution revenue, had been frozen at 1:47. The second account, the one running through the Luxembourg holding structure, had flagged a lock code at 2:03. He was still waiting on confirmation, but preliminary reports from the Baltic routing structure suggested the same pattern. Ronan listened to this without expression. "Bank error," he said. "That was my first thought." Egan kept his voice even. "I spoke to our contact at the clearing institution. It's not a bank error. It was an authorized freeze, executed by an account holder with primary level credentials." The silence in the antechamber had a specific weight. "Who has primary level credentials," Ronan said, and it came out as a statement rather than a question, because he already knew, on some level, the way that intelligent men know things they haven't yet consciously admitted, what the answer was. Egan said nothing. He held Ronan's gaze. "Say it." "Celine's signature is on the primary authorization for all three nodes." Egan kept his voice at the same even register. It cost him something to do this. When the network was structured, the holding agreements were filed under a beneficial ownership arrangement that he stopped, restarted. The short version is that every primary level credential in the offshore structure requires her signature, not your name, her name. "I believed your signatures were co-equal. They're not. Hers supersede." Ronan was very still. This was the stillness that people who knew him recognized as the most dangerous kind. Not the loud danger, not the theatrical anger that made rooms clear themselves efficiently, but the deep stillness of a man whose entire internal architecture was realigning itself around a new fact, and who had not yet decided what the new architecture required of him. "Get her on the phone," he said. "I've tried, she's not answering." "Get Egan someone who can get her on the—" "I am Egan," Egan said, with the measured patience of a man who has had this specific conversation before, wherein Ronan forgets mid-sentence who he's talking to, because his mind is somewhere else. "I have tried every contact I have for her. Petra is not answering either. The apartment near the financial district that she uses as an office space has been vacated as of this morning. The building manager confirms she cleared her materials 3 days ago." 3 days ago? Ronan absorbed this. 3 days ago, Celine had been sitting across from him at dinner. She had reviewed the week's schedule with him. She had been, as she always was, composed, present, and unreadable in the specific way that he had interpreted as contentment and that he now understood to be something else entirely. "She planned this," he said. Egan chose not to answer that question because it was not a question. By evening, the shape of the situation had become clearer and more catastrophic in direct proportion. The cargo network had gone dark. Stroud's vessel was confirmed docked and unresponsive. 2 other captains had been reached and had cited contractual review clauses in their service agreements, clauses that, when Egan pulled the original contracts, were legitimate, had always been in the contracts, and were triggered by the authorization codes that Celine controlled. The political relationships were more complex. Senator Halloran had not returned 3 calls. This was not unprecedented. Halloran was cautious by nature, and a public event like the abandoned wedding might have prompted him to create temporary distance, but it had a different texture tonight. A different quality of not returning calls that felt less like caution and more like a man reassessing which way a wind was blowing. Dante was in the sitting room of the Vescari estate with a glass of something amber and the ring on the coffee table in front of him, sitting in his open palm like a question. "You know what I keep thinking about?" he said when Ronan came in. "Don't. I keep thinking about how she didn't cry." Ronan stood in the doorway. "I said don't. Most women cry. Most people cry in that situation, Ronan. Most people don't walk away like—" Dante gestured with his glass, searching for the word. "Like they already knew which door they were going to. Like they'd already figured out the building." She was embarrassed. She's angry. This is a reaction. Ronan came into the room and picked up the ring from the table. He turned it over in his fingers. The light caught the stone. "I'll get Egan to find her. We'll sit down. You publicly humiliated her in front of every significant criminal figure in the eastern seaboard." Dante said this without heat, which was more effective than if he'd said it loudly. "You handed her ring to me like it was a set of car keys, in front of the Kesslers, in front of Brava, in front of a sitting senator. It was a joke. It wasn't funny, Ronan." The silence between them had 7 years of history in it. All the things Dante had watched and said nothing about, all the calculations he'd made about when to speak and when to stay quiet. And apparently this was the moment he'd decided to stop staying quiet, which Ronan noted with the part of him that cataloged information even when the information was unwelcome. "I'll fix it," Ronan said. Dante looked at him, looked at the ring in his hand, looked back up. "You don't understand what she's done," Dante said quietly. "Do you? You don't actually understand it yet. The accounts are frozen. I understand. Egan's been on the phone for 3 hours. I've been listening." Dante set his glass down. "It's not just the accounts. It's everything. The routing, the captains, the logistics chain, every piece of the financial architecture that makes your operation something other than a bunch of guys with guns. That's all hers. Every authorization key, every signature, every relationship that wasn't built on fear." He paused. "You have the fear, Ronan. You've always had that. But the infrastructure, the thing that makes the money actually work, she built that for 7 years, and it turns out it was built in her name." Ronan said nothing. "Because she let you think it was yours," Dante said. "And you never checked. Why would you check? People who work for you don't eat." He stopped, looked at his glass. "She wasn't working for you. She was working, and you never noticed the difference." Well, the first attempt at contact came at 9 that night. Egan located the Crane Street apartment through a secondary contact and appeared at the door with 2 men and the careful expression of someone managing a situation he wasn't certain was manageable. Petra opened the door. "I need to speak with her," Egan said. "She knows." Petra didn't move from the doorway. She was smaller than either of Egan's men and entirely unbothered by this fact. "She said she'll speak with you, not them." Egan sent the men to the car. Celine was in the apartment's main room, still in the clothes she'd changed into after leaving the cathedral. Dark trousers, a plain gray sweater, her hair down now. She was at the table with a laptop and a coffee cup, and the particular focused stillness of a person doing actual work, and she looked up when Egan came in with the expression of someone who has been expecting a visitor and is mildly satisfied that the timing is consistent with their projections. "Egan," she said. "Celine." He sat down across from her because she didn't invite him to sit, and he sat anyway because he was Egan and decorum had limits. "You've made your point." "Have I?" "The accounts are frozen, yes. The logistics network is on hold, yes." Egan folded his hands on the table. "What do you want?" Celine looked at him with something that might have been, in another context, a kind of tired affection. She had always found Egan the most straightforward person in Ronan's inner circle, which was not a high bar to clear, but was something. Nothing from Ronan, she said. That's not... I don't want negotiation. I don't want concessions. I don't want a conversation where Ronan tells me he's sorry and expects me to accept that and go back to building his empire for him. She closed the laptop. I walked out of that cathedral because the situation warranted walking out of it. I froze the accounts because the accounts are mine to freeze. These are not bargaining positions. They're facts. Egan was quiet for a moment. He'll come himself if I go back empty-handed. I know. And if he comes himself, he'll come, and he won't accomplish anything, and eventually he'll have to accept that. She picked up her coffee cup. Tell him I'm well. Tell him the freeze will remain until I determine otherwise. Tell him that the network is intact and will remain intact as long as no one does anything stupid. She met Egan's eyes. And Egan, tell him specifically that if he sends anyone to apply pressure to any of the people in my network, the entire structure goes into a secondary lockdown that he will not be able to reverse. I want that communicated precisely. Egan studied her face for a long moment. You anticipated this, he said, not accusing, just landing on a truth. I anticipated the possibility, she said. I hoped it wouldn't be necessary. Did you? Really? Celine looked at him. The question was fair. She held it for a second. No, she said. Not really. He said. Egan was at the door when he stopped. There's something else, he said. Celine waited. The ring. He turned. Dante's been examining it. He found something in the setting, under the stone. He thinks it's... He paused, choosing words. He thinks it's some kind of data storage, embedded in the base of the setting. Celine was very still. He hasn't opened it, Egan continued. He didn't know if he should. But he's not the only one who's going to notice it's there, Celine. We have people who look at things like that for a living, and if word gets out that there's something inside that ring, something worth having. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Celine looked at the table in front of her. Her expression had not changed. The composed, unreadable surface that she maintained the way other people maintained breathing. But something moved underneath it, in the place where her actual calculations lived. The ring. She had built the key into the ring 2 years ago, in a moment of what she had understood at the time was either inspired redundancy or mild insanity. The micro-credential embedded beneath the stone contained access pathways to a set of encrypted ledgers, not the financial architecture that Ronan could find through normal channels, but the deeper records, the actual records. Names, accounts, transactions, the full map of corruption that ran from the Vescari network outward into legitimate institutions in every direction. The kind of document that, in the right hands, could restructure organized crime across 4 states. In the wrong hands, could start a war. She had put it in the ring because she had believed at the time that the ring would be on her finger. Thank you, she said. Egan nodded, left. Petra appeared in the hallway. Problem? Petra said. Celine looked at the closed door. The ring, she said. I need the ring back. And the thing she already understood, sitting at that table in the gray-sweatered quiet of an apartment that didn't have her name on the lease, was that getting the ring back was not going to be simple. Because Dante had it, and if Dante had found the compartment, others would find it too. And if others found it, if the wrong people began to understand what the ledgers contained, then what had started as a clean, surgical act of self-preservation was going to become something with much wider and more dangerous edges. She opened her laptop again. The city hummed outside the window. Somewhere across it in the Vescari estate, Ronan was holding the information as Egan had just delivered, and she knew him well enough to know that the stillness he'd been in all day was about to end. That the next phase, the campaign, the force, the relentless mechanical application of every tool at his disposal, was about to begin. She thought, let it begin. She had built the machine. She knew every gear. What she hadn't fully calculated was the ring, and the ring was now in Dante Morelli's hand, and Dante was the one variable in Ronan's entire operation that did not behave mechanically, that could not be predicted, pressured, or planned around with any certainty, because Dante was the kind of person who acted on instinct and affection and whatever the current moment seemed to require. and the current moment had put the key to a powder keg in his jacket pocket. She began to type. Outside, the city went about its ordinary life, unknowing. Below the surface of it, in the financial networks and the shipping routes and the encrypted corridors of a machine that had been built in the dark over 7 years, things were moving, slowly still, but with the gathering momentum of something very large beginning to realize it is falling. Her phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. She stared at it for 2 full seconds, picked it up. The voice on the other end was not Ronan, was not Egan, was not anyone she had planned for. It was Cassian Varga, Ronan's underboss, a man who spoke in the smooth, measured tones of someone who had spent years making violence sound administrative. "Hello, Celine," he said. "I think we should talk. I think you have something I want, and I think I know something you need to hear." He paused. "I think today was always going to happen. I just want you to understand, Ronan didn't do it on his own." Celine held the phone against her ear and did not move. The apartment was quiet. Petra had gone into the hallway, and the hallway was dark, and the only sound was the ambient hum of the city outside the window, and Cassian Varga's breathing on the other end of the line, which was even and measured in the way that told her he had rehearsed this moment. "How did you get this number?" she said. "The same way I get most things." A pause. Not nervous. Calculated. "I'm patient." She stood up from the table and walked to the window. Not because she needed to see outside. The instinct was older than reason, the animal instinct to put her back against something solid and her eyes on the open space. Below, the street was ordinary. Traffic. A man walking a dog. The unremarkable surface of a city that had no idea what was decomposing underneath it. "You said Ronan didn't act alone," she said. "I said today was always going to happen." The distinction was precise. She filed it. "There's a difference." "Then say the difference clearly or end this call." Cassian Varga made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "You've always been direct. I respected that. Ronan never fully appreciated it. He read directness in a woman as aggression. I read it as efficiency. I'm ending the call. Cassian Varga has been feeding Ronan information for 4 months," he said, and shifted suddenly to the third person, which was either affectation or something more calculated, and she wasn't sure yet which. "About your travel patterns, your meetings, the frequency of your communications with external contacts. He told Ronan you were building something on the side, something for yourself." Celine was still. "He framed it as disloyalty," Varga continued, back to first person now, as if the shift had been a test. "He told Ronan that the woman he was about to marry had been quietly repositioning assets in her own name for 18 months. Which is true. He simply left out the reason. Left out the fact that what you were doing was protecting the network from exactly the kind of structural vulnerability that Ronan's own carelessness had created. You told him I was stealing from him. I told him you were building a separate power base, which is also true. I just let him draw his own conclusions about what that meant." The city below was still doing its ordinary thing. The man with the dog had stopped to let the animal investigate something near a lamppost. Ordinary, completely ordinary. "So the ring," Celine said. "Today, that was his idea, his performance, but the seed I planted." Varga's voice was unchanged. "I needed him destabilized. I needed the two of you separated. I needed the network in a state of uncertainty so that when I made my next move, there was no unified response capable of stopping it." "Your next move?" "Yes." "Which is?" "The ledgers," he said. "The ring. What's inside it?" Celine turned from the window. She crossed back to the table and stood looking at the closed laptop and the cooling coffee cup and the specific geometry of a situation that had just expanded beyond the edges she had originally drawn for it. "You know what's in the ring," she said. "I know what you built and I know where you put it. I've been watching you work for 3 years, Celine. You're extraordinary, genuinely. But you have one habit that I recognized early. You over-engineer your redundancies. You build backups for your backups. And the most important thing you've built, you would never leave without a physical failsafe. Something you could carry. Something that looked like something else." The silence stretched. "I want the ledgers," Varga said. "Not to use against you. against Ronan, against the old structure. Everything those records contain, every bought politician, every cartel arrangement, every judge and port authority commissioner and customs official who's been on the Vescari payroll for the last 20 years, I want it. Because with that documentation, the entire existing hierarchy of this network becomes obsolete. Every alliance built on fear and blackmail collapses, and something new gets built in its place. With you at the top. With someone competent at the top. He said it without apology. Which, yes, me. Celine sat down. Not because she was tired, because sitting was the correct posture for thinking, and she needed to think very clearly right now about several things simultaneously. The ring is with Dante, she said. I know. Dante doesn't know what's in it. He will by tomorrow. He's already looking at it. And once he understands what he has, Varga paused. Dante Morelli is loyal to Ronan in the way that dogs are loyal. It's not rational, it's not strategic, it's just the way he's built. The moment he understands that ring contains something powerful, he hands it directly to Ronan. And then Ronan has the ledgers. And Ronan with the ledgers is a Ronan who becomes untouchable, because he can buy every remaining loyalty with documented blackmail on the people who might otherwise refuse him. And you can't allow that. Neither can you, Varga said. Because if Ronan becomes untouchable, you spend the rest of your life either in his orbit or in the ground. There's no third option, not for a woman who knows what you know and has done what you've done. Celine was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, the man with the dog had moved on. The lamppost stood alone in its small circle of orange light. What are you proposing? She said. I'm proposing that we both want the ring, and that I have resources currently positioned closer to Dante's location than you do, and that an arrangement where we coordinate rather than compete is more efficient for both of us. An arrangement, she said. You want the ledgers. I want to use the ledgers. There's a difference. The documentation stays controlled. It doesn't go to law enforcement. It doesn't get released publicly. It becomes a tool of reorganization. Every person named in those records gets a choice. Come under the new structure or face exposure. It's clean. It's surgical. It's blackmail at institutional scale. It's the same thing that's been happening for 20 years, just with different management. She looked at the table. And my role in your arrangement? You keep running the financial architecture, under proper credit this time, with actual authority and actual compensation and an actual seat at the table instead of the arrangement you had with Ronan, where you built everything and got a wedding ring you never actually received. A beat. I'm offering you what Ronan never did. Recognition. Celine looked at the wall. She was thinking about recognition and what it actually meant, and whether Cassian Varga understood that recognition was not what she had been working toward, had never been what she was working toward, that the 7 years had not been an audition for a seat at someone else's table. She was also thinking about the ring, and Dante, and the hours between now and the moment when Dante's natural curiosity or someone else's pressure would open that setting and expose what was inside. I need to think, she said. Of course. Smooth, patient. But Celine, don't think too long. The ring is in play. Events have a momentum now. The people who move first in a fluid situation are the ones who get to choose what the situation becomes. The people who wait too long just react to what others have chosen. She ended the call. She sat for exactly 3 seconds. Then she called Petra into the room. Petra listened to the condensed version without interrupting. She had the quality that made her essential. The ability to receive large amounts of complex information and immediately begin sorting it by operational relevance rather than emotional weight. Varga, Petra said when Celine finished. Yes. He orchestrated the humiliation. Yes. To separate us from Ronan so he could position for the ledgers. Yes. Petra was quiet for a moment. How long has he known about the ring? Long enough. He said 3 years of watching, which means he knew about the backup architecture, knew I'd build a physical failsafe, and spent time identifying what it was. Celine looked at her hands. He's more patient than I gave him credit for. More patient than Ronan. Most people are more patient than Ronan. She stood up. I need to get to Dante before Varga does. Or before Dante shows Ronan what he found, and Ronan has enough to understand what leverage he holds. Can you reach Dante directly? Celine thought about this. She had a number for Dante, not a number she'd called in 3 years, the kind of contact you maintain in your files because eliminating contacts is a discipline that cuts both ways. Whether Dante would answer it was another question. Dante's relationship with her had always been the odd, warm neutrality of someone who respected a person connected to the person he was loyal to, like a dog that's decided the owner's partner is acceptable, but not to be confused with the owner. "I can try," she said. "And if he's already with Ronan? Then I try a different way." Celine picked up her phone. "Get the car ready." The Vescari estate was 40 minutes away, and Dante was not there. This Ronan discovered at 10:15 p.m. when he went looking for him, and found only the sitting room with its empty glass and the impression of Dante's weight in the chair cushion. "Where is he?" Ronan said. The man in the doorway, one of the household security detail, a young man who had the specific physique of someone recently promoted and recently terrified, said, "He left about an hour ago, sir. He took the Maserati." "Did he say where?" "No, sir." Ronan looked at the table where the ring had been. It was gone. Dante had taken it with him. He stood in the sitting room for a moment with his hand in his pocket and his jaw set in the particular quality of controlled anger that he wore like weather. Not loud, but ambient, pressurizing the air in the room until the security man in the doorway took a step back without knowing he had done it. Then he called Egan. "Dante's gone," he said when Egan answered. "Find him." I don't care what you need. Find him." He ended the call. He stood in the empty room and thought about what Egan had told him when he came back from the Crane Street apartment. The freeze would hold until Celine decided otherwise. The network was intact but unresponsive. She had built it in her name. 7 years. While he had been running the operation as he always had, through force and fear and the accumulated weight of a reputation that took decades to build, she had been quietly building a second machine underneath his, and the second machine was the one that actually kept the money moving and the politics manageable and the logistics running. He had treated her like a very valuable instrument. It had never occurred to him that instruments can be picked up by other hands. He went to the window. Outside, the estate grounds were lit by the security lights in the perimeter trees, flat white light that made the manicured lawn look institutional. He had bought this place because the previous owner wouldn't sell. He had wanted it because it was the largest property available in the radius he'd chosen. He had not asked himself whether he wanted to live here or whether it would feel like a home or whether the woman he was bringing into it would find it cold. He had not asked himself very much about Celine at all, he realized. He had assessed her. He had determined her value. He had incorporated her into the operation and found, over 7 years, that the operation ran better, significantly better, with her in it, and had interpreted this the way he interpreted everything, which was to say, he had noted the value and moved on to the next problem. The sound of his own thinking was unfamiliar tonight. He was not accustomed to examining his own logic. Examination was for situations where something had gone wrong and you needed to find the failure point. He didn't examine things that were working. He was now standing in the wreckage of the assumption that things had been working. His phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered it because not answering unknown numbers in his position was a habit he'd broken deliberately. Information arrived from unexpected directions, and the cost of missing it was usually higher than the cost of the occasional unwanted call. "Vescari," said the voice on the other end. He recognized it immediately. Cassian Varga, his underboss, calling from a number that wasn't the number Cassian Varga used for anything, which meant this was a number Cassian kept separate, which meant this was a call Cassian had decided to make under conditions of deliberate separation from normal channels. Ronan felt something in his chest shift, the internal equivalent of a tectonic adjustment, subtle and significant. "Cassian," he said, neutral. "I think we need to talk about today," Varga said, "about what actually happened. I know what happened. You know what you saw. There's a difference." A pause. "I've been hearing things, Ronan, about Celine, about the accounts, about what she's been building for the last few years." Another pause. "And about the ring, about what Dante found." Ronan's hand tightened on the phone. "You know what's in the ring," he said. I know enough to know that whoever controls that ring controls a very different kind of power than what you're used to dealing with, the kind that doesn't need soldiers. Varga's voice was smooth, careful, the voice of a man who had prepared this conversation. I think you should let me come to you, tonight. I think there are things you need to hear about your situation that you're not going to like, but that you need to know. Ronan looked at the window, at the flat institutional light on the lawn. Come, he said. Come now, Sitski. Dante was at the bar on Mercer Street that he'd been coming to for 12 years. The kind of place that had bad lighting and good whiskey and the specific social policy of minding its own business. He sat in the corner booth with a glass in front of him and the ring on the table and his phone face down because he had been calling Ronan for 40 minutes and Ronan had not answered, and the not answering felt like something specific rather than coincidence. He turned the ring over with 2 fingers. In the low light of the bar, the stone was dark, purple-black, the color of a bruise. He had been carrying it since the cathedral. He had felt the compartment in the base of the setting 3 hours ago, sitting in the estate's sitting room, the tiny ridge of the seam almost invisible to the eye, but tangible under his thumb. When he'd been turning it in the same distracted way, he turned things when he was thinking. He hadn't opened it. He didn't know why exactly. Some instinct that said the moment he opened it, the thing inside it would belong to him in a way he wasn't sure he wanted to own, and that there were people in his life who would expect him to hand it over immediately once he understood what it was, and that the window between knowing it was there and knowing what it was might be the last window of simplicity he was going to get. He finished his drink, signaled for another. The door of the bar opened. He looked up because he always looked up. Reflexes that were older than any decision he'd made about the kind of person he wanted to be. Celine Arden walked in wearing dark clothes with her hair loose and the expression of someone who has been moving fast and has just arrived somewhere she needs to be. She scanned the bar in 2 seconds. Found him. Came directly to the booth and sat down across from him without asking. They looked at each other. You found the compartment, she said. Yeah. Have you opened it? No. She exhaled, very small, almost nothing. He would not have caught it if he hadn't been watching for exactly that kind of tell. And he was watching because he was Dante, and watching people was the one thing he'd always been better at than anyone gave him credit for, including Ronan. You need to give it to me, she said. I know. He didn't pick it up. Tell me what's in it first. It's complicated. Tell me anyway. She looked at him. He could see her calculating, not rudely, not dismissively, but the way she calculated everything, with the specific precision of a person for whom information is a material like clay, to be shaped into the form that the situation requires. Ledgers, she said, encrypted. Micro-credential stored in the base of the setting. Gives access to documentation of every corrupt transaction, every bought official, every cartel arrangement in the Vescari network going back 20 years. Dante was quiet. Every judge, she said. Every senator. Every customs official. Every police commander who looked the other way, or did more than look the other way. All of it. Documented. Verifiable. Dante picked up the ring, looked at it. Why did you put it in the ring? She held his gaze. Because I thought it was going to be on my finger. The bar noise continued around them. The low talk, the clink, the television in the corner running a game nobody was watching. Dante set the ring back on the table between them. Varga called me, he said. Selene went still. 20 minutes ago. He told me... Dante stopped, rubbed the back of his neck. He told me some version of today being his doing, being orchestrated. He told me Ronan was fed information designed to make him paranoid about you, and that the paranoia got performed at the altar because that's how Ronan performs things. He looked at the ring. He told me the ring is the key to taking over the whole structure, and that he wants it, and that if I give it to Ronan, Ronan becomes something nobody can touch. What did you tell him? I told him I'd think about it. Dante looked up. I've been sitting here thinking about it. And? He picked up his glass. Drank. Set it down. 7 years, he said. Ronan has known you for 7 years. I've watched him with a lot of people in 7 years. I've watched him use people, and I've watched him discard people, and I've watched him mistake loyalty for ownership more times than I can count. He paused. I never said anything because he's Ronan, and because I'm not built for those conversations, and because it was never... He stopped again. It was never my business. It wasn't my life. Dante? But today. He looked at her. Today was mine. A little bit. Because he used me to do it. He put me in the middle of it. He handed me the ring and laughed and made me part of it. And I laugh too because that's what I do. I laugh because it's easier than whatever the other thing is. His jaw tightened. I don't want to be part of it. Celine reached across the table and picked up the ring. Dante let her take it, watched her close her hand around it. What are you going to do with it? He said. Something I should have done a long time ago. She looked at the ring in her palm. I'm going to make it stop mattering. Before Dante could ask her what that meant, his phone, face down on the table, lit up. He turned it over, read the screen. Something changed in his face. It's Egan, he said. He says Varga is at the estate. He says Ronan is with him. He says... He read the text again. He says he doesn't know what they're talking about, but Varga brought 3 men and nobody told him they were coming and he thinks we should know. Selena was already standing up. Varga moved faster than I expected, she said. She pulled out money and left it on the table without counting it. Come with me or don't, Dante, but decide now. Dante looked at the table, at the empty ring spot where the ring had been. He thought about Ronan in that room with Cassian Varga and Varga's 3 men and whatever version of events Varga was feeding him right now, carefully constructed to move all the pieces into the position that Varga needed them in. He stood up. I'm coming, he said. But I need you to know something first. She was already moving toward the door. She stopped, turned. Varga didn't just call me, Dante said. He also told me something about Ronan that I think changes things. About why Ronan did it today. Not Varga's reason. Ronan's own reason. He held her gaze. He told Ronan you were leaving, that you'd already arranged to transfer the primary credentials to a separate entity you controlled independently, and that the wedding was going to be the last day you were inside the network. That after today, you were gone. Celine stared at him. He made Ronan believe, Dante said quietly, that humiliating you publicly was the only way to make you stay. That if he could make you small enough in front of everyone who mattered, you'd have nowhere else to go. The bar noise filled the space between them. That's insane, she said. Yeah. Dante looked at her. But it's also exactly how Ronan thinks. And Varga knew that. He built the whole thing around exactly how Ronan thinks. He paused. Which means Varga has been inside Ronan's head for a lot longer than anyone realized. And whatever he's saying to him right now in that room, it's built on the same architecture. It's built on knowing exactly which direction Ronan leans and pushing him exactly that way. Celine stood at the door of the bar with the ring in her closed fist, and Dante watching her from 6 feet away, and the understanding settling over her like a change in temperature. The recognition that the situation was larger and more organized than she had calculated. That Varga was not improvising, had never been improvising, had been running a parallel campaign for years inside the organization she'd spent years building, and that the morning of the wedding she had walked into a ceremony that was already a trap, already constructed, already serving someone else's purposes. She had walked out thinking she was the one holding the exit. She was still holding it, but now there was someone else in the building, and they had been there the whole time, and they had known the layout better than she'd known they knew it. Let's go, she said. They went out into the night, the bar door swinging shut behind them, the ring in her hand and Dante at her shoulder, moving toward a house where Ronan Viscari was sitting across from the man who had engineered the worst day of both their lives, hearing whatever version of the truth Cassian Varga had decided to offer him tonight. And in the room at the Viscari estate, while Celine and Dante were still 25 minutes away through nighttime traffic, Varga reached into his jacket pocket and placed a single photograph on the table in front of Ronan. A photograph that showed Celine meeting with a man Ronan recognized, in a location Ronan recognized, on a date that Ronan understood immediately. And the photograph was genuine, and the meeting had happened, and what the meeting appeared to show was so damaging that Ronan's hand went flat on the table with a sound like a door closing, and Varga sat across from him and said nothing, just let the photograph work. And the thing it built in Ronan's face was not anger anymore, but something older and colder and far more dangerous. And by the time Selini's car turned onto the road that led to the estate, Ronan had already made a decision that could not be unmade. Selina's car turned through the estate gates at 11:47 p.m. The gatehouse light was on. The guard who normally worked nights was not in the booth. The barrier was up, but the booth was empty, which was wrong in the specific way that small procedural details are wrong when something larger has already happened. Not dramatic, just absent. The way a room feels different before you identify what's missing from it. Dante noticed it from the passenger seat. He said nothing, but his hand moved to the door handle in the way that hands move toward things before the brain has finished processing the reason. Petra drove through without stopping. Celine had already seen it. "Slow down," Celine said. Petra slowed. The car moved along the private drive at walking pace, the estate house visible at the end of it with more lights on than should have been on at this hour. Not the security perimeter lights, which were standard, but interior lights, upper floors, the kind of diffuse illumination that meant people were moving through rooms. "Something happened," Dante said. "Yes." "Before we got here." "Yes." He turned to look at her profile in the dark car. The photograph. She didn't answer that directly. She was looking at the house. "What do you know about a meeting I had approximately 14 months ago? A man named Holt Devereaux. Hotel in the financial district, private dining room." Dante was quiet for a moment. "I don't know that name." "He works for a federal financial crimes task force, specifically the division that investigates offshore structuring and criminal money laundering." She paused. "I met with him once. I did not provide him with information. I went to understand what they knew and what they were pursuing so I could assess whether any part of the network was exposed. And if Varga has a photograph of that meeting, then what Ronan sees is his accountant sitting across from a federal investigator 14 months ago." She looked at her hands. "Without context, without what was actually said or not said, without the fact that I walked out of that meeting having given Devereaux nothing and having learned that the task force had an informant somewhere in the eastern distribution chain, information I used to close 3 exposure points that Ronan never knew were open." "You protected him," Dante said, "and the photograph makes it look like you sold him." "Yes." "Varga knew about the meeting. Varga has been watching me for 3 years. He told me so himself." She looked at the house. "He's been building this file, waiting for the right moment to use it. Tonight is the right moment. Tonight is the right moment," she said. Petra had stopped the car 20 meters short of the main entrance. The front door of the house was closed. 2 vehicles Selini didn't recognize were parked at angles near the entrance. Not the clean parking of people who planned to stay, but the haphazard angles of people who arrived fast and expected to leave the same way. "Varga's men," Dante said. 3, he said. Celine looked at the vehicles. "Could be more by now. Egan's inside. Egan is 1 man." Dante looked at her. "You're not going in there." "I have to get to Ronan before Varga finishes whatever he's building with that photograph." "Celine." His voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him before. Not the easy warmth of a man performing likability, but something stripped of that, something underneath it that was genuine and a little frightened. If Ronan believes what that photograph suggests, if he's had 40 minutes in a room with Varga looking at evidence that you were meeting with federal investigators, he is not going to listen to your explanation. That's not how Ronan works, and you know it. She knew it. She sat in the stopped car and knew it with the full weight of 7 years of watching exactly how Ronan processed betrayal. Not slowly, not with the patience he occasionally applied to strategy, but with the instantaneous and total conversion of a man who collapses the distance between suspicion and conviction the moment the evidence reaches a threshold that satisfies him. The threshold of that photograph was enough. She knew it was enough. She had known from the moment Dante described it that it was precisely calibrated to be enough. "Give me another option," she said. Dante didn't have one. She could see that in his face. She opened the car door. The front door was unlocked. This was the second wrong thing. The Viscari Estate's front door was not left unlocked at midnight. It was not left unlocked at noon. The security protocol around access to the main house was one of the few things Ronan had designed himself rather than delegating. and it reflected his specific and absolute conviction that the people most likely to kill you were the people you'd let get close enough to try. Celine pushed the door open and stepped into the entrance hall. The house was quiet in the way that houses are quiet, when the people inside them are concentrated in one room. Not empty quiet. Occupied quiet. The kind of silence that has weight and direction. Petra had stayed with the car. Dante was behind Celine's left shoulder. She moved through the entrance hall toward the sound that wasn't quite a sound, the specific quality of air that moves around several bodies in an enclosed space. The study. The door at the end of the hall was closed, but light came under it in a thin line. She was 6 feet from the door when it opened. Egan came out. He pulled the door shut behind him with the deliberate care of a man making sure it latched, and he stood in the hallway and looked at Celine with an expression she had seen on Egan's face exactly twice in 7 years. Both times in the immediate aftermath of events that required significant management. "Don't go in," he said. "Egan, I'm telling you." He said it quietly, precisely the way he said everything. "Not yet. Give me a minute." "What's happening in there?" He looked at her, then at Dante, then back at her. Varga showed him the photograph. "I know. What did Ronan—" He didn't say anything for about 2 minutes. Egan kept his voice at the same even register. "That's the thing. That's the part that tells you where he is. He looked at it, and he didn't say anything, and then he told Varga's men to wait outside, and now it's just the two of them." He paused. "He has a gun on the desk." The hallway was very quiet. "It's not for Varga," Egan said. "I want you to understand that." Celine looked at the door. "He thinks I sold him," she said. "He thinks you sat across from a federal investigator 14 months ago and that the conversation that happened is not the conversation you would tell him happened." Egan held her gaze. "He thinks the network being in your name is not a protective measure, but a positioning measure. He thinks you spent 7 years building something, and the building was always going to end with you taking it somewhere and him being left with nothing." And Varga told him that. Varga showed him the photograph and said almost nothing else. He let Ronan build it himself. Egan's mouth tightened. "Which is the more effective approach. You know that." She knew it. She looked at the thin line of light under the door. Somewhere behind that door, Ronan Viscari was sitting in a room with a gun on the desk and a photograph in his hand and a version of the last 7 years that Cassian Varga had constructed to be internally coherent and emotionally devastating and completely wrong in every detail that mattered. She reached past Egan and opened the door. No. The study was a large room with dark wood paneling and bookshelves that held almost no books. Ronan had bought the shelves along with the estate and had never filled them, and the empty shelves had always struck Celine as the most honest thing about the house, the architectural record of a person who had acquired the space for power rather than for living. Ronan was behind the desk. Varga was in the chair across from it. The gun was on the desk between them, not pointed at anyone, just present, a weight, a fact, the punctuation of a particular kind of conversation. Both men looked up when Celine came in. Varga's expression shifted into something that managed to look like relief, which was the most sophisticated thing she'd seen him do. The performance of a man who is glad the wrong party has arrived to confront the truth, rather than a man who has spent months engineering this exact room and these exact 3 people in it. Ronan's expression did not shift at all. That was the one. That was the expression she had described to herself earlier in the night as the deep stillness, the tectonic kind, and it was here now in full, and it was worse than she had anticipated because there was something in it she hadn't seen before. Underneath the stillness, underneath the cold, something that looked almost like grief. And she had not built grief into her calculations because she had not known it was something Ronan Viscari was capable of, and she was not sure even now whether what she was seeing was real or a reflection of what she needed to see. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. Dante was outside. She had not told him to stay. He had read the room through the 2 seconds the door was open and made his own choice. She walked to the desk. She did not sit down. "The photograph," she said. "I know what it shows. I know what Varga told you it means." "Don't," Ronan said. "I need to explain." "I said don't." His voice was quiet. That was the worst part. She had prepared herself for volume, and there was none. I've been sitting in this room for 45 minutes. I have had 45 minutes to think about every conversation, every meeting, every piece of information you ever brought to me, and to run it through the possibility that you were not protecting the operation but positioning yourself to take it somewhere else. That's not 14 months ago. He looked at the photograph which was on the desk near the gun. November. I remember November 14 months ago. You told me you were traveling to assess a banking relationship. I remember because I asked if it required the trip, and you said yes, and I believed you because… He stopped. Something moved in his face. Because I believed you. Celine looked at the photograph. It was clear and well lit. A telephoto image taken from some distance, probably from an adjacent building. She and Devereaux at a corner table. Her back was 3/4 to the camera. Devereaux was visible full face. The image was time-stamped. Someone had been very patient and very prepared. The man in that photograph works for a federal task force, she said. I met him once. I gave him nothing. I went because I had intelligence that the task force had an active informant inside the Eastern distribution chain, and I needed to understand the scope of their investigation without alerting whoever was feeding them information from the inside. You went to meet with a federal investigator, Ronan said, and you didn't tell me. I didn't tell you because the informant inside the distribution chain was someone you trusted, and I didn't know yet who it was, and I couldn't risk the information reaching them before I'd identified and closed the exposure. And the informant, she looked at him directly. I identified them 4 months after that meeting. I closed the exposure. The person is no longer in a position to provide information to anyone. Something moved across Varga's face. Very small. She caught it because she was watching him and because she had learned to watch for the micro-expressions that careful people try to suppress and rarely entirely succeed in suppressing. It was not surprise. It was the expression of someone who has just heard a piece of information that fits into a slot they already knew existed. She held on to that for later. Why didn't you tell me after, Ronan said, after you'd closed it? Because by the time I'd closed it, 3 months had passed and the exposure was sealed, and telling you meant explaining the meeting and explaining why I hadn't told you about the meeting at the time, and she stopped, made herself say the actual reason. And because I'd learned in 7 years that information I brought to you that reflected any gap in the network security was information you received badly. You would have focused on the exposure and the informant, and you would have handled it in a way that created new exposure. So I handled it myself and closed it clean and said nothing. Ronan was looking at her with the stillness that had no bottom. You made that decision, he said, for me. I made the decision that protected the operation. You made the decision, he said again, and the second time it was different. The emphasis fractionally shifted, the word landing on a specific weight, that I didn't need to know, about a federal investigator, about an informant inside my own network, about a meeting you had in November that you told me was a banking review. He paused. How many other decisions did you make for me? The room was very quiet. Ronan, she said, look at who brought you this photograph. Look at whose hands it came through. Look at what Cassian Varga needs you to believe tonight and ask yourself why he needs you to believe it. Varga shifted in his chair. The shift was the tell. The body's instinct to prepare for being looked at directly, which meant Varga had not fully anticipated her pivoting to him in this moment, which meant there was something in this room that he hadn't fully accounted for. She turned to him. You told me tonight that you'd been watching me for 3 years. You told me you knew about the ring because you recognized my habit of building physical fail-safes. You told me the meeting with Devereaux was something you'd documented. She paused. When did you document it? Varga's face was composed. I'm not sure what… The photograph is time-stamped November. When did you take it? I had surveillance. When did you identify Devereaux as a federal investigator? A beat. Very small. I had resources that… You knew who he was before I met with him, she said. You knew who he was, and you knew I was meeting with him, and you let the meeting happen. You documented it and let it happen because a photograph of a meeting you'd prevented was worth nothing, but a photograph of a meeting you'd allowed was worth exactly this room. Exactly tonight. The silence was different now. Ronan was looking at Varga. She's deflecting, Varga said. His voice remained smooth, but the smoothness was the smoothness of ice. Not warmth, just surface. This is what she does. She controls information. She controls narrative. You let the meeting happen, Ronan said. His voice had changed. Something had entered it that hadn't been there before. The particular quality of a man whose internal architecture has just shifted again, in a new direction, around a new fact. You had surveillance on her in November. You knew she was meeting with a federal investigator, and you didn't tell me. I was building a complete picture before 14 months. Ronan looked at him. You sat on that information for 14 months. While you were in my house, sitting across from me at my table, running operations I authorized. His hand moved on the desk, not toward the gun, away from it. The specific movement of a man who has just recategorized a situation from one kind to a different kind entirely. You waited 14 months for a night when it would do the most damage. Varga's composure cracked. Not completely, he was too practiced for complete, but at the edges, in the set of his jaw, in the way his hands came together in his lap. The photograph is real. The meeting happened. Whatever her explanation, why did you need the wedding to fall apart? Ronan said. The question landed in the room with the weight of something that had been flying toward this point from a long distance. Celine watched Varga's face. You needed me humiliated in front of everyone who matters, Ronan continued, and the voice had gone flat now, had stripped itself of everything except the architecture of someone building toward a conclusion. You needed the network destabilized. You needed her out. And you needed me convinced she was the enemy, so I'd be looking the wrong direction while you positioned for... He stopped. The ring. That was always the ring. Dante has the ring and Dante is... He stood up. Where is Dante? Outside, Celine said. Get him. To Varga. Don't move. She went to the door and opened it. Dante was in the hallway leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who has been listening through a door and is not certain whether to be relieved or more worried than before. He wants you, she said. Dante came in. The room had rearranged itself, Celine by the door, Dante beside her, Ronan standing behind the desk with Varga in the chair, with the specific stillness of a man who has realized the room has shifted against him and is calculating his options. The ring, Ronan said to Dante. Dante looked at Celine. She nodded. Dante took it from his jacket pocket and held it out. Ronan looked at it across the desk. Did not take it. You found the compartment, Ronan said. Yeah. But you didn't open it. No. Why? Dante was quiet for a moment. Because I didn't know whose hand to put it in yet. He looked at his oldest friend across the desk with 7 years of loyalty and tonight's particular exhaustion in his face. I still don't, but I know whose hand I'm not putting it in. He glanced at Varga. Varga moved. He was fast, faster than his composed administrative manner suggested he could be. And the movement was not toward anyone in the room, but toward the door. A sudden controlled lunge that covered half the distance before anyone had fully processed that it was happening. And in his hand as he moved was something small that Celine registered before she could identify it. And then she identified it, and then Dante stepped sideways and caught Varga's arm at the elbow with both hands, and drove it into the doorframe with a sound that was not the sound of the thing in Varga's hand discharging, but was the sound of a joint reaching its limit. And Varga made a sharp sound that was the only uncontrolled thing she had seen from him all night. The device, not a gun, something smaller, a wireless transmitter with a single button, hit the floor. Ronan was around the desk in 2 seconds. He had Varga by the collar with one hand, and the doorframe had Varga's back, and the room was suddenly very small. Who did you just try to signal? Ronan said. Varga's face was white. His arm hung at an angle. You don't. Who? The transmitter was on the floor between them. Celine looked at it, looked at the door, looked at the windows of the study which faced the east side of the property, and at the flat institutional light of the security perimeter visible through the glass. And she understood before anyone else in the room said it, because she had been building to this understanding since the empty gatehouse at the entrance and the unlocked front door, and the 2 vehicles parked at bad angles and the particular quality of quiet that a house has when the people inside it are concentrated in one room. "The men at the gate," she said. "Not yours." She looked at Varga. "You replaced Ronan's gate security." The transmitter on the floor had a red indicator light. It was blinking, which meant the signal had already been sent, which meant whoever was on the receiving end was already moving, which meant the 6 or 8 or 12 minutes between the signal and whatever the signal was calling in had already started their countdown. Egan appeared in the doorway. He had heard the impact. He looked at Varga against the wall. He looked at the transmitter on the floor. Something moved across his face with the speed and completeness of a man who has done the same calculation Celine just did and arrived at the same answer. "We need to move," Egan said. "Right now." Ronan hadn't let go of Varga. "Ronan," Celine said it once, sharp. "Leave him. We need to go. He's not—" "There are people coming through that gate right now who were called in to clean this room, all of us in it." She held his gaze. "Leave him." Ronan looked at Varga. Varga looked back at him with the broken-armed composure of a man who has played a long game and lost the last move and knows it and is not yet sure what it costs him. Ronan released him. "Move," he said, to the room, to everyone. They moved. They went through the kitchen and out the service entrance at the back of the house with Egan in front and Dante behind and Ronan between them, and Celine moving alongside with the ring in her fist, and Petra pulling the car around with the headlights off in the way that Petra did the things she did, efficiently, without being told, correctly. They were 30 meters from the car when the first sounds came from the front of the house. Not gunfire yet, movement, the organized movement of people who know a layout and are moving through it fast. And from the sound of it, there were more than 3, more than 5. The kind of number that told her Varga had been building toward this for months. Not just the photograph, not just the transmitter, but bodies. Actual bodies positioned outside the estate for exactly this night, exactly this window of vulnerability. Dante grabbed her arm and pulled, and she ran because running was the correct response. And she ran with the ring in her hand and the gravel of the service path under her feet and the sound of the house being entered somewhere behind her, with the particular quality of people who aren't trying to be quiet because they've passed the point where quiet matters. They reached the car. Petra was already moving. Celine pulled the door shut and the car was moving before it fully latched, and through the rear window she saw the service entrance door open and light spill out, and a figure step through it and raise something, and she put her head down below the window line from old instinct and felt rather than heard the impact that starred the rear window's corner and understood that the people Varga had positioned outside were not interested in taking prisoners and had been told clearly what tonight required of them. The car went through the service gate. Petra had the code, had always had the code, and out onto the secondary road that ran along the estate's south perimeter. And then they were on the road and moving, and the estate was behind them, and the ring was in Celine's hand, and Ronan was in the seat beside her for the first time in the same enclosed space since the cathedral 12 hours ago. He was looking straight ahead through the windshield. His breathing was controlled and even. His hands were in his lap, and they were not entirely still. "Varga has people positioned across the network," he said. Not to her specifically, to the car. "Tonight was the move. If I was dead and you were dead and the ring was in his control..." He stopped. "How long has he been building this?" "At least 3 years," she said. "Probably longer." "Inside my house." He turned to look at her then, and the expression on his face was the most exposed thing she had seen from him in 7 years. Not the stillness, not the performance of authority, but something raw and disoriented underneath all of it. The expression of a man who has understood all at once that the floor he has been standing on was never where he thought it was. "He was inside my house, and I never—" "Neither did I," she said. "Not completely." Silence. The car moved through dark roads. "The photograph," he said finally, "was real." She looked at him. "The meeting was real. Everything I told you about it is also real." He looked at her for a long moment, then he looked back through the windshield. "I need you to know," he said, and stopped. "Ronan, I need you to know that what I did today..." His jaw tightened. "What I did at the ceremony. Varga told me you were leaving. He told me the credentials were already in the process of being transferred to a separate entity. He told me that after today you were..." He stopped again, started differently. I know it's not enough. I know that's not what it looked like. I know it doesn't. He looked at his hands. I used you like a prop, in front of everyone, to make you small enough that you couldn't leave. He said it with the specific bluntness of a man who has never said this kind of thing before and is choosing precision over comfort. That's what I did. That's what it was. The car moved through the dark. I know, Celine said. It was the most... I know what it was, Ronan. He was quiet. Dante's voice came from the back seat, low and tired. So what now? Celine looked at the ring in her hand, the stone dark and the setting hiding its secret and the whole history of what it contained. The ledgers, the names, the 20 years of documented corruption that Varga had wanted badly enough to build 3 years of strategy around. She thought about Varga's face when she said she had identified and closed the informant inside the distribution chain, the micro-expression she'd caught and held for later. She was holding it now, turning it over, and understanding was arriving in pieces. The informant that she had found and closed, the person inside the Eastern distribution chain who had been feeding information to the federal task force, she had identified them. She had removed them from the position where they could provide further information. She had believed at the time that the informant was motivated by fear of prosecution, a mid-level logistics coordinator who had been flipped by Devereaux's task force and was feeding low-level operational data. She had been wrong about the motivation. She had been wrong about who was running the informant. It wasn't Devereaux's task force that had flipped the logistics coordinator. It was Varga. The informant was Varga's inside line into the Eastern distribution records, not to expose the network to federal investigators, but to map it, to understand every routing relationship, every captain, every payment structure, before the moment when he would need to take it over. He had used the task force as cover, allowed the coordinator to make contact with Devereaux's people, allowed just enough low-level information to flow that the task force believed they had a legitimate informant, while the coordinator's primary function was feeding Varga the operational map of a network he intended to acquire. When she had closed the informant, quietly, surgically, believing she was protecting Ronan from federal exposure, she had actually cut Varga's primary intelligence line into the Eastern distribution architecture, which was why Varga had moved tonight. She had not closed an exposure. She had started a countdown without knowing it, and tonight was what the countdown had been counting toward, and the understanding of it sat in her chest like something physical, like a stone she had been carrying in the wrong hand and had just transferred, and the weight was the same, but the position changed everything. Celine, Egan said from the front passenger seat, where are we going? She looked at the ring. She looked at Ronan. She said, I know where Varga is going to go next. I know what he needs and where he's going to go to get it. But the only way to be there first requires something that... She stopped, looked at the road ahead. It requires Ronan to hand something over that he has never handed to anyone. Not to me, not to Egan, not in 20 years. Ronan turned to look at her. What? He said. She met his eyes. Control, she said. And the car moved through the dark with all 4 of them in it, and the ring in her hand and the city somewhere ahead, and behind them the estate was lit and occupied, and Varga was still inside it, broken-armed and recalculating, and somewhere in the network that Celine had spent 7 years building in her own name, and Ronan's reputation in the careful architecture of choices made in the dark, something was about to change in a way that neither of them could walk back from, and they both knew it, and the silence between them in the back seat of that moving car was the most honest thing that had happened between them in 7 years. Ronan said nothing for 11 seconds. Celine counted them, not deliberately. The counting was automatic. The same reflex that logged timestamps and tracked silences and measured the weight of pauses the way other people measured distance. 11 seconds was a long time for Ronan Viscari to be quiet in a situation that required a response. She had seen him make decisions about violence in less than 3. Define control, he said. The financial architecture, the authorization credentials, the routing relationships. She looked at him. All of it moves on my signatures. If we're going to get ahead of Varga tonight, if we're going to be where he's going before he gets there, I need to be able to move the network as a unified instrument, not as separate pieces requiring separate authorization. And I need you to not override me, not second guess, not redirect. She paused. Whatever I decide needs to happen, it happens. The car moved through dark residential streets. Egan was watching the road. Dante in the back seat was watching Ronan. "For how long?" Ronan said. "However long tonight takes." Another silence, shorter this time. "Where is Varga going?" he said. "The harbor. There's a facility at the East Dock to a secured storage and transfer point that was built 18 months ago under a logistics subsidiary, ostensibly for cargo processing, actually for the physical records archive, hard drives, encrypted backups, paper ledgers going back 15 years. She kept her voice level. It's the one location in the entire network where the physical documentation of everything exists in consolidated form. Varga knows about it because he helped design the security around it. I didn't know at the time what he was actually designing. I thought he was protecting the archive. He was mapping it. "He's going to take the archive," Egan said from the front. "He's going to take the archive, and then he has two things: the physical records from the harbor facility and the digital ledgers from the ring. Together they give him the complete picture, every transaction, every relationship, every piece of blackmail material that the Viscari network has accumulated in 20 years. With both, he doesn't need soldiers. He doesn't need territorial control. He has something better." She looked at Ronan. "He has the ability to destroy every person in this city who ever did business with us. That's not power over criminals. That's power over the infrastructure of the city itself." Ronan's jaw was set. "How far to the harbor?" he said. 22 minutes at this speed." "What does he have there?" "I don't know exactly. His positioned men from the estate will need time to regroup. He needs to get there himself. His arm is broken. All of that slows him." She calculated. "We have a window. Narrow." "Egan," Ronan said, "already on it." Egan had his phone out. "I have 2 men near the waterfront, 15 minutes. Get them there. I need your authorization to—" "You have it." Egan made the call. Celine looked at Ronan. He looked back at her. The car seat between them was approximately 18 inches of upholstery and 7 years of accumulated weight, and neither of them moved across it. "Tonight," he said. "Yes." "After." "One thing at a time," she said. He looked at the road, nodded once. The nod was small, and it cost him something. She could see that it cost him, the specific expenditure of a man who does not cede ground as a posture, and is doing it now as a conscious act, a choice made in real time with full awareness of what it is. "Do what you need to do," he said. She was already on her phone. The East Harbor at 12:40 a.m. was exactly the kind of place that operational decisions got made. Not in boardrooms, not in the constructed elegance of estates, but in the functional ugliness of working infrastructure. Rusted cargo cranes stood against the sky like stripped trees. Shipping containers were stacked in irregular formations along the dock, their painted surfaces peeling and salt-corroded, the colors faded to the approximate tones of old bruises. The facility lighting was industrial, flat, white, creating hard shadows behind everything and illuminating nothing well. Petra killed the headlights 2 blocks out and navigated by the ambient light of the dock's perimeter. They parked between 2 container stacks on the access road north of the facility entrance. Outside, the air tasted like salt and diesel, and the specific metallic smell of water that has been worked in for a long time. Celine got out first. The wind off the water was cold, and it hit her without ceremony, the way cold always does at waterfronts. Not gradually, but immediately, the temperature simply changed, and the change was absolute. She stood between the containers and listened. The harbor was not quiet. It was never quiet. Even at this hour, there was the ambient working sound of the port, distant engines, the creak of rigging, the mechanical heartbeat of a facility that ran without reference to the time of day. But underneath it, there was something specific and closer, and she identified it in the first 20 seconds. Vehicle engines, recently stopped, southeast of their position, inside the facility perimeter. Varga had gotten here faster than she had projected. She turned to say it, and Ronan was already reading it in her face. "How many?" he said. "Unknown, at least some. He had more resources positioned than he told me about." She looked at the facility entrance. A gate and a chain-link fence, locked, With a security keypad she had the code for. Egan's men. 4 minutes out, Egan said. We can't wait 4 minutes, Dante said. We may not have a choice. If Varga gets into the archive room before we're inside, he can lock it from the interior. Celine looked at the gate. Once it's locked from the inside, it requires a physical override that takes 20 minutes with the right equipment. We don't have 20 minutes, and we don't have the equipment. Ronan looked at the gate, looked at the facility. Something moved in his face that was the operational version of him, stripped of everything interpersonal, just the machinery of a man assessing a problem for which force is the most direct solution. What do we need to prevent? He said. Varga accessing the server room in the facility's northeast corner. The physical archive is adjacent to it. If he can get both, he transfers everything he needs and burns the rest. How many ways in? The main gate, a service entrance on the south side, a fire egress on the east wall, locked from the outside, can only be opened from inside. She paused. And through the loading bay on the north end. That one requires a vehicle to breach the door, but it's not electronically locked. Ronan looked at Petra. Petra looked at the car. Don't, Celine said. It's a car, Petra said, with the equanimity of someone who has very thoroughly separated herself from attachment to objects. She got back behind the wheel. The loading bay door buckled on the first impact and came off its lower track on the second, and the car stopped inside the facility's northern end with steam coming from the hood and the door hanging at an angle and the sound of the impact still reverberating through the metal walls of the building. They were out of the car before the sound finished. Inside the facility, the lighting was the same flat industrial white as the perimeter, but brighter, the kind of brightness that removes all ambiguity about what a space contains. The loading area was large and largely empty. Pallets stacked against the far wall, a forklift parked and idle, the concrete floor with its painted directional lines, and the particular acoustic quality of large enclosed spaces. From the southeast section of the building, the sound of movement, not trying to be quiet now. Ronan moved left. Egan moved right. Dante stayed near Celine, not because anyone had assigned him there, but because that was where he positioned himself, and she recognized it as the specific loyalty of a person who has decided which direction to face and has faced it. She moved straight ahead. The facility's interior was a series of interconnected spaces, the loading area opening into a processing corridor, the corridor branching toward the administrative section on the left and the storage section on the right, and at the intersection, the northeast corner where the server room sat behind a reinforced door that she had the code for, and Varga had the code for, and very few other people had the code for. She was 30 feet from the corridor entrance when the first of Varga's men came around it. He was moving fast and he was big, and he was not expecting someone to be coming toward him from the loading bay direction, and the half-second of mutual surprise was the half-second that Dante used to move in front of her, and the impact when it came was between the two of them rather than between the man and Celine, and it was loud and physical, and she went around both of them while it was still happening. The corridor was lit and empty. 20 feet to the server room door, she ran. Behind her, from the loading area, the sounds of multiple people moving, the acoustics of the building turning everything into echo so that 3 bodies sounded like 8. From the southeast section, a sharp crack that was unmistakably a gunshot, followed by silence, followed by Egan's voice saying something short and operational that she couldn't make out. She reached the server room door, the keypad, her fingers on the pad. 6 digits. The door didn't open. She stopped, looked at the keypad, entered the code again. Nothing. The code had been changed. She stood at the door with her hand on the keypad and her heart going at a rate she could feel in her throat, and understood in the 2 seconds it took her to process this that Varga had changed the server room code from the inside, which meant Varga was already inside the server room, which meant he had arrived here not 20 minutes after the estate, but simultaneously, which meant there was a second vehicle and a second approach that she had not known about, and the window she had calculated as narrow had already closed. She hit the door with the flat of her hand. Metal. Solid. The reinforced door of a room designed to resist exactly this. "He's inside," she said to the corridor, to Ronan if he could hear her. Ronan appeared at the end of the corridor, moving fast, blood on his shirt at the shoulder. Not his wound, she registered it as someone else's from the color and distribution. He looked at her hand on the keypad and read the situation in 1 second. How do we get in? We don't. Not quickly. He changed the code. Ronan looked at the door. It was steel reinforced, set in a concrete frame, designed to the same specifications as a small vault. He looked at it the way he'd looked at the other door, the unmanageable one at the estate, and she saw him reach the same conclusion. There's another way, she said. He looked at her. The server room has an environmental vent system, climate control for the equipment. The intakes are on the east exterior wall. Large enough if you're not large. She looked at him. Not you. Absolutely not, he said. I've done things you didn't know about for 7 years. I can do this. She held his gaze. The vent panel on the exterior is a maintenance access point. Standard screws. I need a flat implement in 2 minutes, and I need you to make sure nobody comes around that east wall while I'm on it. Celine, he's destroying the archive right now. Her voice didn't rise. Every minute we argue is records he's burning. Give me 2 minutes. His face went through something. She watched it happen. The collision of his instinct to control the physical situation with the fact that the physical situation had, tonight, already required him to relinquish control in ways that had not yet killed either of them. He reached into his jacket and produced a folding knife. 2 minutes, he said. The east exterior wall was around the building and exposed to the harbor wind and the noise of the water and the full cold of the night, and the maintenance access panel was at chest height, 6 screws, which she removed with the blade of the knife against the screw heads, a technique that was slow and hard on the hands and worked if you were patient. She was patient. She was also aware of the time in the specific way that people are aware of time when everything depends on it. Not abstract awareness, but physical, each second arriving with actual weight. The 6th screw came out. She pulled the panel. The vent was a square approximately 18 inches on each side, tight, not impossible, designed for air and maintenance equipment, and apparently for a woman of her exact dimensions who was willing to commit fully to an undignified and uncomfortable forward crawl in the dark. She went in head first. The duct was metal, and the metal was cold, and the sound inside it was the sound of her own breathing amplified and returned to her, and she moved through it on elbows and knees with the ring in her jacket pocket and the knife closed and held in her right hand, not as a weapon, but as the only tool she had. 20 feet of duct. The sound of the server room's equipment getting louder, the fans, the cooling systems, the constant mechanical respiration of maintained technology, and underneath it, another sound, closer, the specific physical sound of a person doing work. Varga. She found the interior vent cover by feel, the slightly different texture of the grill against the duct wall, the thin line of light around its edge. She pressed her hand to it. The grill was fastened with interior screws she couldn't reach with the knife in this position. She put her shoulder against it instead and pushed, and the thin metal of the interior grill cover bent against the fasteners, and then the fasteners pulled through the drywall behind the duct, and the whole thing came in with a sound like a cabinet falling. She came out of the duct onto the server room floor with no grace whatsoever, and found herself on her hands and knees on a cold, hard surface, with the grill cover underneath her and the knife in her hand, and Cassian Varga 4 feet away. He was at the archive station, a steel shelving unit along the east wall with external hard drives stacked in labeled rows, a laptop connected to a transfer hub, and a small device with a red indicator light that she recognized as a degausser, a magnetic pulse tool for destroying drive data. His broken arm was braced against his body. He was operating with his good hand. He was fast. The degausser had already been through at least 4 drives by the evidence of the ones dropped on the floor. He turned when she came out of the duct. They looked at each other across 4 feet of server room floor, both of them breathing hard, both of them understanding exactly what the next few seconds were. "You're smaller than I would have predicted," he said, and it almost sounded like professional appreciation. She stood up. "Step away from the drives." "In exchange for what?" "In exchange for the option where this ends with you leaving this room alive." "I have a man outside that door." You had men at the estate too. She kept the knife visible, at her side, not raised. How's that going? His jaw worked. His broken arm was held against his body at the angle that arms hold themselves when the radius is fractured above the wrist. She knew the position from a specific memory she didn't reach for right now. His face was pale with the specific pallor of someone managing serious pain while trying to present as unaffected by it. The drives I've already cleared, he said. That information is gone. Then stop here and 4 drives is all you take. I need the transfer complete. He looked at the laptop. The digital copies need to go to an external server before the transfer is already interrupted. She looked at the laptop screen, reading it from 4 feet away with the same reflex that had always made her better at this than people expected. Your transfer protocol requires the ring credential to authenticate the ledger files. The ring is not in this building. You have the physical drives you've already cleared, and you have nothing else. She paused. Step away from the drives. He looked at her, then at the laptop, then back at her, and she saw him do the calculation she had just described. Run the actual status of the transfer, realize she was right, understand that the leverage he came here to acquire was incomplete. The degausser was still in his good hand. Cassian, she said, it's over. Not entirely. His voice was still even, still controlled, still the voice of the most patient man she had encountered in 7 years of working among people who exercised extreme patience as a survival skill. You think Ronan is your ally tonight because you're both in danger. But tomorrow, he wakes up and you're still the woman who had an unauthorized meeting with a federal investigator who built the network's financial architecture in her own name without his knowledge, who walked out of his wedding in front of every powerful person in his world. The degausser moved slightly in his hand, not toward her, just moving, the nervous energy of a man whose plan has narrowed to the one remaining edge he has. I lose tonight, but so do you. You just don't know it yet. The door behind Varga, the server room's interior access door, clicked. The keypad on the other side beeped. Varga turned his head, looked at the door, back at her. I changed the code. You changed the code from inside, she said, but the override for a code change requires the original master sequence, which is in the archive system. She looked at the door, which Egan has access to. The door opened. Ronan came through it. Not Egan. Ronan. He filled the server room the way he filled every room he entered, and he looked at Varga with the expression that had no performance in it at all. Just the bare structural fact of a man who has arrived at the end of a very long chain of decisions and has found the thing he came for. Varga raised the degausser, not at the drives, at Ronan. It was not a weapon in any conventional sense, and all 3 of them knew it, but the gesture was the gesture of a man with nothing left in his hand who still raises it anyway, and Ronan crossed the 4 feet between them before the arm had fully extended and had Varga's wrist with one hand, and the degausser was on the floor and Varga's back was against the shelving unit, and the remaining drives rattled in their labeled rows. Don't, Celine said. Ronan had his forearm across Varga's collarbone, Varga's good wrist pinned, the broken arm crushed between them by position, and Varga making a sound that was the sound of someone not allowing themselves to make the sound their body was producing. Tell me why, Ronan said. His voice was quiet. Everything about it was quiet. Tell me one real reason. Varga looked at him. His face was white, and his chest was heaving, and his composure, the most sustained and disciplined composure she had observed in 7 years, was finally, completely gone. Because you were never going to give it to me, Varga said. 19 years, everything I built for you, every problem I solved, every alliance I structured, every situation that could have destroyed you that didn't because I managed it. You were never going to look at me the way you looked at her. His voice was not angry. It was something worse than angry, flat with the exhaustion of a truth too long unspoken. She walks in, and in 3 years she has what I spent 19 building, and you handed it to her without even knowing you were doing it. The server room was very quiet. Ronan's arm across Varga's collarbone didn't move. You could have said that, Ronan said. People like you don't hear it. You don't hear it, Ronan. Varga looked at him. You absorb people. You use them. You make them essential, and then you make them invisible. You did it to me for 19 years, and you don't even know you did it. And the one time I tried, the one time I came to you and said I wanted more, that I'd earned a seat at the top, you looked at me like I'd asked you for something unreasonable, and you went back to whatever you were doing. He was breathing in short measures now, the broken arm grinding against something with every inhale. So yes, I built an alternative. I positioned for the day when the structure would redistribute. I was patient. 19 years, and I was patient for 3 more. He looked at Celine. And then she closed my source inside the distribution chain, and I knew I was out of time. Celine held the knife at her side and looked at the man who had spent 3 years building a trap around everyone in this room and had come within 1 ring credential of completing it. Dante appeared in the doorway. His face had a cut above the eyebrow that was bleeding in the efficient, unconcerned way that head cuts bleed, and he looked at the tableau, Ronan and Varga against the shelving, Selene with the knife, the scattered drives on the floor. And his expression was the expression of a man who has gotten here late to something that has already been decided. How bad, he said, meaning the building, meaning the people outside. Egan has them, Ronan said, without looking away from Varga. 2 of Varga's men won't need managing going forward, Dante said, which was not a pleasant way to put it, and was the accurate way to put it. The others are contained. He touched the cut above his eyebrow absently, looked at his fingers. What about this one? He stays, Celine said. Ronan looked at her. He stays alive, and he stays contained, she said. Because we're going to need him to answer specific questions about every contact he's made in the last 3 years, and every resource he's positioned and every arrangement he's built that we don't know about yet. Dead, he's useless. Alive, he's an inventory of information we don't have. She met Ronan's eyes. But that's a decision you make. Ronan held her gaze. Then he looked at Varga. At the 19 years in Varga's face, and the 3 years of patience and the broken arm, and the thing that was true in what Varga had said, the part about absorption and invisibility that sat in the room without anyone claiming it or refuting it. He stepped back. Varga slid 2 inches down the shelving unit and stopped himself. His breathing was audible. The broken arm came up against his body again. Secure him, Ronan said, to no one specifically, to whoever was in the room and capable of doing it. Dante moved forward. Celine looked at the server room, at the 4 drives on the floor that Varga had already cleared, information gone into magnetic silence, at the remaining drives in their labeled rows intact, at the laptop with the failed transfer protocol on its screen, and the red authentication error where the ring credential should have been. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out the ring, held it in her palm. The stone was dark. The setting was small, and the world in it, the credential, the ledgers, the complete map of 20 years of corruption, was compressed into a space that fit in a closed hand, which she had thought 2 years ago was elegant design, and which she now understood was also a vulnerability she had narrowly kept from becoming catastrophic. She closed her hand around it. Outside the server room, through the door that Ronan had come through, the sounds of the harbor facility were changing. Not the ambient sounds, but the human sounds. The sounds of the situation resolving itself into a new configuration, which was the configuration of people who had survived an evening that had required them to become different things than they had been at the beginning of it. The rain had started at some point during the last 30 minutes without anyone inside the building noticing. She could hear it on the facility's metal roof. The particular percussion of rain on industrial surfaces, heavy and indifferent, the weather pursuing its own logic completely independent of what was happening below it. Ronan came to stand beside her. Not touching, not speaking, just occupying the same few feet of server room floor, both of them looking at the drives and the laptop and the scattered evidence of a night that had started at an altar and ended here. The ring, he said. The drives that are intact need to go somewhere secure, not the estate. She was already planning. The archive needs to be redistributed. No single physical location should hold everything. I should have done that months ago. She was aware that she was talking through the next 18 hours of operational requirements because it was easier than the other conversation, and that he was aware of it too. The Varga network, every resource he positioned, every contact he built in the last 3 years, needs to be mapped and neutralized before any of them act independently now that he's contained. I know, Ronan said. There's a lot to do. I know. And the people in those ledgers, the politicians, the officials, the judges, once we have the full picture of what Varga accessed and where copies might exist, Celine, she stopped. He turned to look at her, and she turned to look at him, and they were standing in a server room in a harbor facility at 1 a.m. with the rain on the roof and Dante securing Cassian Varga against the far wall and the whole night's wait between them. And he looked at her with the face that had finally, after 12 hours of performance and strategy and controlled violence, run out of everything except what was actually underneath it. Tonight first, he said. Then all of it. But tonight first. She held his gaze. She said, There's one more thing you need to know. He waited. The photograph. The meeting with Devereaux. The informant I found and closed inside the distribution chain. She looked at the ring in her hand. The informant wasn't feeding Devereaux. He was feeding Varga. The task force contact was cover. Varga was using your own man to map your own network from the inside, and I closed the line without knowing what I was actually closing. She met his eyes. When I cut that line, Varga's timeline accelerated. Tonight happened because of something I did, not because I was protecting you incorrectly. I was protecting you correctly with the information I had. But I closed something without understanding its full context, and that closure is part of what brought us to this building. Ronan looked at her for a long moment. You couldn't have known, he said. I should have known more. You knew more than anyone else in my operation. His voice had no forgiveness in it because it needed none. It was a statement of fact delivered in the register of a man who has spent the last few hours fundamentally revising his understanding of the last 7 years. More than Egan, more than Varga, more than me. He paused. You didn't have bad information. You had incomplete information. There's a sound from the facility's east exterior wall. Not rain, not the harbor. Something with direction and intention. Celine went still. Dante looked up from where he was securing Varga. Ronan turned toward the sound. It was a vehicle. Multiple vehicles. Moving along the East Dock access road at speed, and the sound was closing rather than passing, and the quality of it, the number of engines, the pace, was not the sound of Port Authority or harbor maintenance. Egan appeared in the doorway. His face had the specific controlled pallor of a man who is receiving information and processing it very fast. We have a problem, he said. A serious one. Ronan looked at him. Varga had a second failsafe, Egan said. Independent of the transmitter at the estate. Time triggered. If he didn't send a cancellation code by 1:15 a.m. He looked at his watch. It was 1:22. It went to 3 separate cartel liaison contacts. The message tells them the Viscari network has been compromised by a federal informant and is actively cooperating with investigators. It tells them the documentation proving it is at this facility. He paused. It tells them anyone inside this facility tonight is a liability that needs to be removed. The rain on the roof was the only sound for exactly 2 seconds. Then Ronan said, How many? And his voice was the voice of the loading bearing wall again, the structural version, the one that had held up the architecture of his operation for 20 years by being the one thing that did not flex when everything around it was flexing. 3 separate groups converging, Egan said. The Breva cartel liaison has 8 men and they're 3 minutes out. The Kessler family enforcement is coming from the north with unknown number. And there's a 3rd group I can't identify yet, but they're already inside the south fence. Celine looked at the ring in her hand. She looked at the drives on the shelves. She looked at Ronan. And she understood. In the crystalline, terrible clarity of a moment where all possible options have been reduced to one, that there was no longer a choice between what to do and what to protect and what to sacrifice, because Cassian Varga's patience had been longer and his redundancies had been deeper than she had calculated for, and the building they were standing in was about to become the convergence point of 3 separate forces, each of whom had been told that the people inside it were the enemy and the ring in her hand and the drives on the shelves and everything she had spent 7 years building were all in the same room, and 3 minutes was not enough time to move any of it. And the only asset she had that none of the converging forces knew about was the ring itself and what it contained. And if she was going to use it, she had to use it now before the building was surrounded, before the window closed, before the final 3 minutes expired into a situation that none of them would be able to think their way out of because there would be no space left in which to think. She looked at Ronan. "Do you trust me?" she said. He looked at her. Outside, the sound of the vehicles was very close now, and the rain was hard on the roof, and somewhere in the facility's south section, a door was opening that should not have been opening, and Dante had his hand on Varga's collar and was looking at Ronan with the face of a man who has followed this person through 20 years of situations that should have ended badly, and has arrived at one that he is genuinely not certain they walk out of. "Yes," Ronan said. She opened the ring. The compartment in the base of the ring's setting was smaller than it looked like it should be. Celine had designed it that way. The credential was stored on a chip approximately the size of a grain of rice, embedded in a resin capsule, seated in a depression machined into the gold by a jeweler in Prague, who had asked no questions because she had paid him enough money that questions were not in his professional interest. The chip connected via near field to a reader device the size of a pen cap that she had carried in the lining of her jacket for 14 months. She produced the reader now. Ronan watched her connect the chip to the reader and plug the reader into the laptop that Varga had been using for the transfer, and her hands were steady, in the way that hands are steady when the body has made a decision that supersedes fear and is simply executing. "What are you doing?" Ronan said. "The ledgers." She was typing. "Every name in them, every transaction, every documented arrangement between your network and every politician and official and enforcement commander in this city." She looked at the screen. The authentication went through. The files were there. The full archive, 2 years of patient construction, the complete record of institutional corruption that Varga had been willing to burn a network to acquire. "I'm sending them." "To who?" "Everyone." She opened a distribution protocol she had built 18 months ago and never used. Every relevant federal investigative body, every major news publication with a financial crimes desk, every oversight committee with jurisdiction, all of it, simultaneously. Encrypted packages with full authentication chains so nothing can be disputed. She paused. "Once I send this, the ledgers are public. The blackmail value is gone. Every person named in these records faces consequences that don't require us to administer. And the leverage that Varga has been building toward, the ability to hold an entire city's power structure by the throat, evaporates." Ronan was very still. "It also exposes everything we built," he said. "Yes. Every arrangement, every paid relationship, every operation." "Yes." He looked at her. "It exposes me." She held his gaze. "Yes." The rain on the roof, the sound of vehicles outside, closer now, the convergence she had put at 3 minutes now, probably at 90 seconds. From the south section of the facility, the sound of the door that should not have opened had been followed by footsteps, and the footsteps had been followed by silence, which was sometimes better than footsteps and sometimes much worse. "There's no other move," she said. "The drives Varga already cleared are gone. The people coming through that fence have been told were federal informants. Every cartel relationship, every allied family. Varga's message has already reached them. We can't fight our way through 3 separate enforcement groups in this building. And if we run, and they find the archive, the leverage transfers to whoever gets here first." She looked at him. "The only way to destroy the weapon is to fire it at everyone, including our Safaz." Ronan looked at the screen, at the distribution list, at the authentication confirmation and the file package, and the send protocol waiting for a final confirmation. He looked at Dante. Dante was holding Varga against the wall and looking at Ronan with the expression he'd worn for 20 years. The specific expression of a person who knows someone well enough to know when they have arrived at the genuine edge of themselves, the place past which there is no performance left. "Whatever you decide," Dante said. "I'm here either way." Ronan looked at Egan. Egan said, "The South group is inside the building, 60 seconds, maybe less. Ronan looked at Celine's hand on the keyboard. Do it, he said. She hit send. The confirmation took 4 seconds. 4 seconds was a long time in a room where 60 seconds had just become 45. She watched the progress indicator move across the screen with the particular focused calm of a person who is committed to an action and is now simply waiting for the physics of it to complete. And when the confirmation came, a single green indicator, the packages distributed, the authentication chains verified and transmitted, she closed the laptop and stood up and looked at Ronan. It's done, she said. He nodded once. Now we need to not be in this building, Egan said, with the measured urgency of a man who considers all emotional processing to be appropriately scheduled for later. They moved. The north loading bay was the only exit with a vehicle, and the vehicle had a caved hood and a cracked radiator and Petra behind the wheel with the specific expression of someone who has been sitting in a damaged car in an industrial facility for 15 minutes, listening to things happen and has opinions about this but is keeping them professionally internal. Dante had Varga by the collar. Varga was moving under his own power, barely, his broken arm held against his chest with a rigidity that spoke of the kind of pain that becomes structural. Not something you manage, something you build your body around just to keep moving. They reached the car. From the south end of the facility, voices. Not loud, not panicked. The controlled communication of people moving through a space with purpose, which was the more concerning kind. Get in, Petra said. The car won't make it far, Celine said. It'll make it to the access road. After that, we improvise. Celine got in. Ronan got in. Dante pushed Varga in and followed. Egan took the front passenger seat and was on his phone before the door was fully closed. The car started. The radiator was making a sound like gravel in a dryer, and the hood was misaligned enough that steam was visible even in the rain. But the engine ran and the wheels turned, and Petra guided it out of the loading bay and onto the access road without headlights in the rain, navigating by the ambient industrial glow of the dock perimeter. Celine watched the facility recede through the rear window. No one was visible at the loading bay yet. She gave it 40 seconds before someone found the vehicle tracks in the wet gravel. In, Ronan said, working on it. He had his phone at his ear. I have a contact at the South Marina. 10 minutes from our current position, he has a boat. Call it in. Already calling. The car moved through the dock access roads with the rain hard against its windows and the sound of the harbor all around them. Cranes and water, and the mechanical pulse of the port that continued regardless of what had just happened in one of its facilities, because the port had no opinion about the people moving through it, only about the cargo. Celine looked at the ring in her hand. The compartment was still open. The tiny depression in the base of the setting, empty now, the chip extracted and connected to the reader. She closed the compartment carefully. Reset the setting's edge with her thumbnail. The ring looked exactly as it had at the beginning of the day, which now felt like a different year. She looked at Ronan beside her. He was looking at the road ahead through the rain-covered windshield, and his face was the most exhausted she had ever seen it. Not the exhaustion of sleeplessness, but the exhaustion of a person whose internal architecture has been completely rebuilt in the course of a single day and is still, at 1:30 in the morning, processing the scope of the reconstruction. She said nothing. There was nothing useful to say in the back of a failing car moving through a harbor in the rain. Everything that needed to be said was going to require the kind of stillness that this evening had not yet offered. The boat was a 40-foot motor vessel registered under a name she didn't recognize, which meant Egan's marina contact operated at the appropriate level of discretion. The contact himself was a lean, weathered man in his 60s who took one look at the group arriving at his dock. The rain-soaked clothing, Dante's bleeding eyebrow, Varga's held arm, the general condition of people who have recently been through something structural, and said nothing beyond cast off in 2 minutes before going directly to the helm. They put Varga in the forward cabin. Dante stayed with him. Egan made 3 calls on the dock before they left, short calls, operational, the kind that begin to manage the administrative aftermath of a night that had generated significant administrative aftermath. He got on the boat last. Celine stood at the stern rail as the boat moved out of the marina slip and into the harbor proper, the dock receding, the city's waterfront lights becoming a line across the dark water. The rain had thinned to something between mist and drizzle, not enough to shelter from, not enough to matter. Ronan came to stand beside her at the rail. They stood there for a while. The city lights ran in broken reflections across the water below them, orange and white and occasionally the blue-white of industrial lighting, all of it fragmenting and reforming with the motion of the water, which was the motion of weather and tide, and had nothing to do with what the city was or contained. "The packages will be received by morning," she said. "The news desks will move fast. Federal investigators will be slower, but they'll move." She looked at the water. "By tomorrow afternoon, the landscape will be different." "Yes," he said. "The names in those ledgers, Halloran, the Kesslers, every arrangement we had with enforcement, with Port Authority, with the licensing commissions." She paused. "It all comes apart." "Yes." "And the things we did," she said, "that are also in those records." "Yes." His voice was even, not resigned, deliberate. "You said you wanted to accept responsibility." "I do." She looked at him. "That's not a thing people usually mean when they say it." "I know what I mean." He looked at the water. "I spent 20 years building something on a foundation that required other people's fear to stay standing. I didn't think about what it cost them. I thought about what it produced." He was quiet for a moment. "I looked at you the same way. For 7 years. I looked at what you produced and I didn't think about what it cost you." He turned to look at her. "I'm not going to tell you that I understand it now in the way you'd want me to understand it. I don't think one night changes the way a person thinks, but I know it differently than I did this morning. That's what I have." She held his gaze. "It's not enough," she said. "For what this morning was." "No," he said. "It's not. I'm not going to tell you it is. I'm not asking you to." The boat moved through the harbor. The city lights continued their fragmented reflections below. She looked at them for a long time. "What happens now?" she said. Not to him specifically, to the question itself. "We answer for what we built," Ronan said. "I talk to legal counsel in the morning. I don't run. I don't reposition assets to mitigating jurisdictions. I don't do any of the things I would have done a year ago." He looked at the water. "I dismantle what's left, voluntarily, with documentation, in a way that gives anyone who worked for me the option to separate themselves from what comes next. You'll do time." "Probably." "Significant time." "Probably," he said again. "I know what the ledgers contain." She looked at his profile in the misted dark. The jaw. The weight of him. The structural quality that she had cataloged in the first year of knowing him as useful and had never permitted herself to name as anything else, because the other name for it would have required her to have an opinion about Ronan Viscari that went beyond his operational value, and she had never given herself that permission. "Varga was right about one thing," she said. He looked at her. "You absorbed people, made them essential and invisible." She held his gaze. "You did that to me. I let you do it because the work was real, and I believed in the architecture even when I didn't believe in the person commissioning it." She paused. "But I also made choices. I built things in my name without telling you because I didn't trust you with the truth of what I was doing. And part of that was self-protection, and part of it was—" She stopped, made herself finish the sentence. "Part of it was that I wanted something that was mine, after 7 years of building something that went under your name." "It was yours," he said. "It was always yours. I just didn't say it. Saying it now costs you nothing." "I know." He looked at the water. "I know that." The boat moved. She closed her hand around the ring and felt the weight of it. The manufactured history, the real stone, the empty compartment that had held the key to the thing that had ended them all tonight, one way or another. "The ring," she said. "Keep it," he said. "I don't want it." "Then do whatever you want with it." He looked at her. "It was never a real heirloom. I think you know that." She looked at the ring in her palm, the dark stone, the setting that had hidden 7 years' worth of final recourse in a space the size of a fingernail. She thought about throwing it into the water. The gesture was available, the darkness, the harbor, the appropriate cinematic weight of a moment that invited exactly that kind of punctuation. She thought about it and then she didn't do it, because it was too clean for what the ring actually was, which was a complicated object that had existed in multiple registers simultaneously and deserved to be treated with the complexity it had earned. She put it in her jacket pocket. Oh. They docked at a private slip on the west side of the harbor 2 hours before dawn. Egan had arranged transport and temporary housing through a contact chain that had nothing to do with the Vescari network. Clean, independent, the kind of resource that a careful man maintains precisely for the nights when the primary structure is no longer usable. Dante came out of the forward cabin when they docked. He looked tired in the bone-deep way that people look tired after sustained violence. Not sleepy, but emptied. He had a bruise forming along his left jaw to accompany the cut above his eyebrow, and he walked with the slightly careful gait of someone taking inventory of their injuries and concluding they are manageable. He looked at Celine. Varga wants to make a statement, he said, to law enforcement. He says he'll provide full cooperation in exchange for... He can make whatever arrangement he negotiates, she said. That's not ours to control anymore. Dante nodded. He looked at Ronan. You okay? No, Ronan said. Dante nodded again. Okay. He put his hand briefly on Ronan's shoulder, a gesture so understated it was almost nothing, and communicated exactly everything it needed to. Then he stepped back and looked out at the water. What about the people Varga positioned, he said. His network, the contacts he built over 3 years. Egan's already mapping it, Celine said. The people who can be reached and offered exit arrangements will be reached. The people who move independently. We can't control that. She paused. Some things we can't contain, some consequences we started tonight that we don't get to manage the landing of. Is that okay? Dante asked. She thought about the question. Not the rhetorical version of it, the real version, the one that sat underneath the night's events and required an honest answer. No, she said, but it's accurate, and I'll take accurate over comfortable. He almost smiled. It didn't quite form, but it was in the direction of one. Egan appeared with keys and a brief and a professional expression that suggested he had already filed the emotional processing of the evening under a category labeled for later and had moved on to logistics, which was how Egan had survived 19 years in a structure that had not been designed for longevity. They separated at the dock. Egan took Varga under escort to a location where the relevant legal arrangements would begin. Petra took the car, the second car, the undamaged one from the marina contact, and went in the direction that Petra went when events required her to go somewhere and take care of things and not elaborate further. Dante walked toward the dock's overnight parking area with his hands in his pockets and his jacket open in the cooling air and the specific posture of a person who is walking toward a night of solitary thinking that they are not looking forward to but have accepted as necessary. That left Celine and Ronan on the dock. The harbor was quieter here. The industrial sounds of the port were distant, and the water against the dock pilings was the dominant sound. Regular, persistent, unconcerned. Where will you go? He said. Crane Street, for tonight. She looked at the water. After that, I don't know yet. I've spent 7 years planning specifically so that I would have options. I have options. She paused. What about you? The estate. His voice was flat. In the morning, I call my attorney. I start the process of... He stopped. Dismantling is the wrong word. It implies something collapsed. I'm going to choose to end it. There's a difference. He looked at her. There has to be a difference. She understood what he meant. The difference was the only thing that separated what he was going to do from what the night had done to him. The deliberate choice to close something rather than have it taken. The agency in a situation that had stripped everything else from him. There is a difference, she said. He looked at the water for a long moment. I'm going to release the people who worked for me, he said. Everyone who can walk away, I'm going to release them from whatever they thought they owed, whatever obligations they believed they had. He turned to look at her. Including you. Whatever you built, wherever you go with it, that was always yours. I should have said it years ago. She held his gaze. You're saying it now, she said. Yes. It's still late. I know. He looked at her with the face that had no performance left in it. It doesn't become retroactively not late because the night required honesty. I know that. She looked at him, at the jaw and the dark eyes and the structural quality that she had spent 7 years categorizing as useful, and that she understood now, standing on a dock in the pre-dawn with the harbor around them, was also something else. Not warmer than she'd allowed herself to see it, not better, but more complicated, which was a different thing and in some ways more demanding to hold. "The soldiers you're releasing," she said, "some of them won't know where to go. I'll make arrangements, as many as I can manage before the legal situation narrows what I'm able to do." He paused. "It's not enough. I know it's not enough. For 20 years of building something on their exposure while I had protection they didn't have. I know." "Then start there," she said. "Start with knowing it." He nodded. She was already leaving. Not dramatically, not with the weight of a final scene, but with the practical business of a person who has a car waiting and a night that needs to end in a bed somewhere, and a morning coming that was going to require everything she had. She turned and walked toward the dock's parking area and the city. She had gone perhaps 30 feet when he said her name. She stopped. She didn't turn. She waited. "I know you're not coming back," he said. "I'm not asking you to." His voice was even. Careful. The voice of a man choosing every word with the awareness that these were the last ones. "I just want you to know that whatever this was, the 7 years," he paused, "it was the best work of my life, and the worst failure of it. I know those two things belong to the same period, and I'm not going to try to separate them." She stood with her back to him, and the harbor around both of them, and the city ahead of her beginning to show, in the very furthest eastern distance, the suggestion of a sky that was changing from black to something that was not yet color, but was no longer the full dark of the deepest part of the night. "I know," she said. She kept walking. 3 months moved through the city with the ordinary persistence of time, which has no opinion about the events it contains. The ledger packages reached their destinations before 6 a.m. on the morning after the harbor. By 8, the first news desk had confirmed authentication and begun making calls. By noon, 2 sitting senators had issued statements through legal counsel. By the following morning, the story had a name and a file number and the kind of institutional momentum that does not stop once it starts. Senator Halloran resigned on a Tuesday. The Port Authority Commissioner was indicted the following week. The cascade was not orderly, cascades never are, but it had a direction, and the direction was the one that Celine had set when she hit send in a server room with rain on the roof and 3 groups of armed men converging on the building. Ronan Vescari was interviewed by federal investigators on a Thursday morning, accompanied by legal counsel, and did not invoke his right to silence. He provided a complete accounting of every operation, every arrangement, every network relationship he had authority over, and he did it with the same precision and without the self-protective omissions that typically characterize cooperative witnesses, which surprised the investigators and produced a document of unusual completeness and utility. The legal proceedings that followed were significant and were expected to be long, and he faced them without the posture of a man who believed he was being treated unjustly. The estate sold in 8 weeks. The proceeds, after legal obligations, went to a restitution fund that his attorney established for a specific list of people, former employees, people whose livelihoods had been tied to the network and who had not made the choices that made its collapse inevitable. It was not enough. He knew it was not enough. He had told Celine on a dock in the dark that he knew, and he had meant it, and knowing it was the thing he carried forward because there was nothing else he could offer, and something was better than the alternative, which was the comfortable amnesia of a man who decides the past belongs to a different version of himself. Cassian Varga entered into a cooperation agreement and provided testimony that proved useful to several parallel investigations, and provided him with a sentencing consideration that he understood was less than he deserved and more than he could have reasonably expected. His broken arm healed without full range of motion. He did not complain about this to anyone, which was the last exercise in the patience he had built his entire strategy around. Dante Morelli disappeared from the city for 6 weeks and reappeared in the spring running a small boat charter business on the coast, 3 states from where any of the events of the past year had occurred. He called Ronan twice in the months that followed, Calls that were short and operational in the way that calls between people who have survived something together are short and operational, the words carrying weight that the words themselves don't contain. He called Celine once to tell her that the cut above his eyebrow had left a scar that he found he didn't mind, which she understood was not a message about the scar. Egan worked for 4 months managing the legal and administrative dissolution of the Vescari network's remaining legitimate subsidiaries, with the methodical efficiency of a person who has decided that the ending of things can be done well or badly, and that doing it well is the last professional courtesy available to him. When the work was complete, he retired to a house he owned in a coastal town that he had never mentioned to anyone during 19 years of employment, and he discovered that the house needed a new roof, and the project occupied him entirely for 3 weeks, which he found to be the appropriate medicine for the preceding 19 years. Celine worked. That was the constant. Through the 3 months of aftermath and institutional fallout, and the particular kind of attention that comes when your name appears in federal filings, she worked, building the infrastructure of what came next with the same patience and the same architectural precision she had applied to the previous 7 years, but differently, under her own name, with documentation that was not designed to be hidden. She opened a financial consulting firm. Its first clients were 4 small businesses and a municipal credit union, and the work was slower and paid less and required the kind of patient relationship building that could not be compressed into efficiency, and she found that she did not mind this. She had always known how to be patient. The patience had simply been serving a different structure before. The ring stayed in the top drawer of her desk at the Crane Street apartment. She had not thrown it in the harbor, and she had not sold it, and she had not worn it, and for 3 months those had been sufficient non-decisions. She had not been required to make the actual decision yet, and she had not forced herself to. On a morning in late spring, with the window open and the street noise coming in with the air that was finally warm enough to let in without a reason to immediately close it again, she took the ring out of the drawer and sat with it on her desk for a while. She thought about what it had been, manufactured history in a real setting, a family story built retroactively around an object that had never actually been what it claimed. The stone was genuine. The gold was genuine. The compartment she had machined into it was her own work. Everything else was constructed. She thought this was actually a fairly accurate description of most things she had valued. Not as a despairing conclusion, just as a fact, one that coexisted with the other fact, which was that constructed things could still be real, could still carry weight, could still mean something true, even if the story attached to them was somebody's invention. She closed her hand around it. Then she put it in her jacket pocket, walked downstairs, and went to work. The city was doing its ordinary morning business, people moving with coffee cups and briefcases, and the self-contained purpose of people who have somewhere to be. And she moved through it the way she had always moved through it, with the peripheral thoroughness that looked like nothing from the outside and was, on the inside, simply the way she was built. Cataloging, measuring, understanding the structure of things. The difference was what she did with the understanding now, where she put it, whose foundation it served. She thought, walking, about the last thing she had said to Ronan on the dock. The I know that had held everything, acknowledgement and grief, and the specific exhaustion of a night that had required her to be more versions of herself than a person should be asked to be in a single set of hours. She thought about whether she had said it to comfort him or to end the conversation or because it was simply the most accurate thing available, and she concluded, 3 months later, in the clear spring morning, that it had been all 3 simultaneously, and that this was not a problem because the 3 were not contradictory. She knew. She had known things for 7 years. She would keep knowing them, differently now, in service of a different structure, and the knowing was the continuity, the thread that ran through all of it, and was, in the end, the only thing that had actually been hers from the beginning. The ring was in her pocket. She didn't take it out. She walked through the morning with it there, its weight small and specific and honest, the weight of something complicated that had earned its complication. And the city opened up before her the way cities do in the good hours, with the particular generosity of ordinary life continuing in all directions, indifferent to what it had cost to be here inside it, which was the only kind of generosity that the world was reliably capable of offering, and which she had learned, finally, was enough.